The train's whistle cut through the afternoon like a knife through old leather, and Evelyn Mercer felt her stomach drop for the 100th time since leaving Chicago. She pressed her gloved hand against the smudged window, watching the landscape transform from rolling green hills into something harder, sharper. The mountains in the distance looked like broken teeth against a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Montana. The word had sounded romantic in Calvin Rourke's letters. He described sunsets that painted the valley gold, cattle that grazed across land stretching farther than the eye could see, a house with a wraparound porch where they'd drink coffee and watch the seasons change together. His handwriting had been careful, almost delicate. A man who takes his time, Evelyn had thought back then, folding those letters and rereading them until the creases went soft. That was 4 months ago. Now the train was slowing, brakes screaming against metal, and Evelyn's reflection in the window looked like someone else entirely. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her brown traveling dress, the nicest thing she owned, was wrinkled from 3 days of sitting upright in passenger cars that smelled like tobacco and unwashed bodies. She'd barely eaten since St. Louis, partly because she couldn't afford the dining car prices, mostly because fear had a way of killing appetite. The conductor's voice boomed through the car. "Hollow Creek, 15 minutes." Evelyn's hands trembled as she gathered her things. One carpet bag. That was all she'd brought from Chicago. Everything she owned in the world fit in one bag that weighed maybe 15 pounds. The woman across the aisle, older, severe-looking, wearing black like she was in mourning, watched Evelyn with open curiosity. "Meeting someone?" the woman asked. "My fiancé," Evelyn said. The word felt strange in her mouth. She'd never said it aloud before. The woman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Pity, maybe. "You're a mail-order bride." It wasn't a question. "I prefer to think of it as correspondence," Evelyn said stiffly. "Honey, you can call it whatever helps you sleep at night." The woman leaned back, folding her arms. "But out here? You're what you are. And what you are is a woman desperate enough to marry a stranger." The words hit like a slap. Evelyn turned away, heat flooding her face. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to explain that she wasn't desperate. She was practical. Chicago had been eating her alive one rent payment at a time. The factory where she'd sewn sleeves onto men's shirts had closed after the owner died. Her landlord had already started making the kind of suggestions that made her skin crawl. Calvin's letters had arrived exactly when she needed an escape route. But desperate and practical looked the same from the outside. The train jerked to a halt, and Evelyn nearly fell forward into the empty seat in front of her. Outside, Hollow Creek materialized like something from a fever dream. It was smaller than she'd imagined, smaller than seemed possible for a town that existed on maps. One main street, maybe. Wooden buildings that leaned slightly like old men who'd forgotten how to stand straight. Mountains loomed in every direction, making the valley feel like the bottom of a bowl. And there, on the platform, a handful of people waited. Evelyn scanned their faces through the window, searching for Calvin. He'd sent a photograph 6 weeks ago, a formal portrait showing a man with neat hair parted down the middle, a respectable suit, eyes that stared directly at the camera without smiling. She'd studied that photograph so many times she could draw it from memory. But now, looking at the platform, she didn't see him anywhere. "You getting off or not?" The conductor stood in the aisle, already reaching for her bag. "Yes, sorry." Evelyn stood, smoothing her dress even though it was pointless. She moved toward the exit on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The Montana air hit her first, dry and sharp, and nothing like Chicago's humid thickness. It smelled like dust and pine, and something else she couldn't identify. Animals, maybe. The platform boards creaked under her boots as she stepped down, carpet bag clutched in both hands like a shield. The other passengers flowed around her, a businessman in a bowler hat, 2 miners still dusted with ore, a young couple who looked as lost as she felt. The train hissed behind her, already preparing to leave, already abandoning her. "Calvin?" Evelyn called out, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "Calvin Rourke?" No one answered. The people on the platform stared at her. An older man in a leather apron, a woman with a baby on her hip, 2 cowboys who looked like they'd stepped out of a dime novel, all dust and worn denim. Their expressions ranged from curious to confused to something that looked uncomfortably close to pity. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, approaching the man in the apron. "I'm looking for Calvin Rourke. He was supposed to meet me here." The man's face did something complicated. He glanced at the woman with the baby, who looked away quickly. "You're the bride," the man said finally. Yes. Is he here? Is Calvin here?" Behind her, the train whistle screamed. Evelyn turned just in time to see it pulling away, black smoke pouring from its stack. The sound of it leaving echoed off the mountains, and suddenly the valley felt impossibly large, and she felt impossibly small. "He left town 4 days ago," the man said. The words took a moment to land. When they did, Evelyn felt something cold slide down her spine. "I'm sorry, what?" "Calvin Rourke. He left town 4 days back, rode out east, didn't say when he'd be returning." "But Evelyn's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. "But I sent a telegram 3 weeks ago. He knew I was coming today. He knew." The woman with the baby stepped closer. Her expression was gentler than the man's, but that somehow made it worse. "Honey, Calvin always knows. That's the problem." "I don't understand." "You're the 4th one," the woman said quietly. "4th girl to get off that train expecting to marry Calvin Rourke." The platform seemed to tilt. Evelyn grabbed the railing to steady herself. "4th? First one was 2 years back," the man in the apron said. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing weather. "Pretty thing from Philadelphia. She stayed 3 days before someone robbed her of everything she had. Disappeared after that. Second girl made it maybe a week before she ran off crying. Said Calvin wasn't the man she'd been writing to. Said something about the letters being written by someone else. Third one?" He trailed off, glancing at the woman. "Third one vanished," the woman finished. "Just up and disappeared one night about 8 months ago. No one knows if she left on her own or if something happened to her. Sheriff looked for her for a while, but..." She shifted the baby higher on her hip. "But Calvin has friends in this town. People who owe him money, people who don't ask questions." Evelyn's carpet bag slipped from her fingers, hitting the platform with a sound like a body falling. She stared at these strangers who were telling her that her entire future had been a lie, that the careful letters, the photograph, the promises, all of it had been some kind of sick game. "Why?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "Why would he do that?" "Calvin likes to play with things," one of the cowboys said. He'd moved closer without Evelyn noticing, and up close she could see the hard lines around his mouth. "Likes to see what he can control. He don't actually want a wife. He wants to know he could have one if he decided to." "That's enough, Dutch," the woman said sharply. "It's the truth, Martha." The truth isn't always helpful. Evelyn barely heard them arguing. Her mind was racing through calculations. She had $17.38 left after paying for the train ticket. Maybe enough for a week at a boarding house if she was careful. Maybe enough for a ticket back to Chicago if she didn't eat much. But back to what? The factory was closed. Her room had been rented to someone else by now. She had no family left. Her mother died of pneumonia 2 winters ago, her father years before that. She'd burned every bridge to get on that train. And Calvin Rourke had known she was coming, had known exactly what would happen when she stepped onto this platform and found no one waiting. "Are there jobs here?" The question came out before she'd fully formed it in her mind. "Any kind of work?" Martha's expression softened further. "Honey, I'm not asking for charity. I can work. I can sew. I can cook. I can clean. I'm stronger than I look." Evelyn heard herself talking faster, desperation bleeding through despite her best efforts. "I just need something temporary, enough to save for a ticket east. The saloon might..." One of the cowboys started. "Dutch, so help me." Martha cut him off with a look that could curdle milk. "I wasn't suggesting. I know exactly what you were suggesting." They were still arguing when Evelyn heard it. A sound that cut through everything else like light through darkness. A child, screaming. "Mama!" Evelyn turned just in time to see a small figure break away from the edge of the crowd and run straight at her. A boy, maybe 8 years old, wearing clothes that looked slept in and boots too big for his feet. His face was streaked with dust and tears, and his eyes were wild with something that looked like hope and grief mixed together. He slammed into Evelyn with enough force to nearly knock her over. Small arms wrapped around her waist, and the boy buried his face in her dress. shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded like they'd been building for a long time. "Wyatt!" A man's voice, sharp with shock. Evelyn stood frozen, hands hovering over the child's back, having no idea what to do. The boy was crying so hard he could barely breathe, repeating the same word over and over into the fabric of her dress. "Mama, mama, mama." "Son, let go of her." The voice was closer now, and Evelyn looked up to see a man striding across the platform. He was tall, rangy in the way of men who spent their lives working outside. His face was weathered, beard untrimmed, eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a battered hat and clothes that had seen better years. He looked exhausted. "Wyatt, she's not—" The man stopped a few feet away, and something complicated crossed his face as he got a clear view of Evelyn. "Jesus. I'm sorry," Evelyn said quickly. "I don't know, he just—" "You look like her." The man's voice had gone flat. "You look exactly like her." "Like who?" "Sarah. My wife." He said it like the words cost him something. Wyatt's mother. The boy's grip tightened. Evelyn looked down at the top of his head, at the way his whole body was shaking, and something in her chest cracked open. "Where is she?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Cemetery. Been there since January." Winter. The boy had lost his mother in winter, which meant, Evelyn did the math quickly, 4 months ago. Maybe 5. Not long enough for grief this raw to have faded even slightly. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Don't need your sorry." The man's voice was rougher now. He reached for his son. "Wyatt, come on. Let the lady go." "No." The word was muffled but firm. The boy's arms tightened around Evelyn's waist. "No, I want to stay with her." "Son, she smells like Mama did. She feels like Mama." Wyatt's voice broke on the last word. "Please don't make me let go. Please." Evelyn felt tears burning in her own eyes. She'd never had children, had barely been around children. But the desperate need in this boy's voice was something she understood on a level that bypassed logic entirely. She carefully, very carefully, placed her hands on Wyatt's back. The man noticed. His jaw tightened. "You don't have to—" "It's all right," Evelyn said softly. "It's not all right. He's got no right to—" The man stopped, dragging a hand over his face. Up close, Evelyn could see the shadows under his eyes, the lines of stress carved deep around his mouth. "I'm sorry. He hasn't been the same since she died. None of us have." Martha stepped closer, her voice gentler now. "Cole Hale. This is the girl Calvin Rourke brought out from Chicago." Cole's expression hardened. "Another one." "Another one," Martha confirmed. "Hell!" Cole looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, and she saw something like anger flash across his face. Not at her, she realized. At the situation. At Calvin. At the unfairness of it all. "You got anywhere to go?" "No," Evelyn said. There was no point in lying. "Any money?" "Some. Not much." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. Wyatt had finally stopped crying, but he hadn't loosened his grip on Evelyn. The platform around them had gone silent, everyone watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, Cole spoke. "My ranch is about 10 miles north. House needs work. My boy needs—" He stopped, corrected himself. "We need help. Someone who can cook, clean, maybe help with some of the lighter ranch work. Room and board included, $20 a month." Evelyn stared at him. "You're offering me a job?" "Temporary," he said quickly. "Just until you can figure out what you're doing next. I'm not— This isn't—" He seemed to be struggling with the words. "I'm not like Calvin. This is honest work for honest pay. Separate room, respectful. That's all." "Cole, are you sure?" Martha started. "I'm sure." His tone suggested the discussion was over. Evelyn looked down at Wyatt, who had finally lifted his face from her dress. His eyes were red and swollen, but there was something like hope in them now. Something that made him look less like a ghost and more like a child. She thought about Chicago, about the closed factory, and the creeping landlord and the gray skies that seemed to press down like a weight. She thought about Calvin Rourke's letters, so carefully crafted, so beautifully deceptive. She thought about having $17 and nowhere to go and no one waiting anywhere in the world for her. And she thought about the way this broken child was looking at her like she might be the answer to a question he was too young to know how to ask. "All right," Evelyn said. "I'll take the job." Relief flickered across Cole's face so quickly she almost missed it. "Good. We'll leave in an hour. I need to pick up supplies." "I'll need to—" Evelyn gestured vaguely at the town. "Is there a place I can freshen up?" Martha stepped forward. "You can use the back room at my shop. It's not much, but there's a basin and a mirror." "Thank you." Wyatt finally, reluctantly, released his grip on Evelyn's waist. But he didn't step away. He just stood there looking up at her with those hopeful, wounded eyes. "You're really coming home with us?" he asked. Evelyn picked up her carpet bag. "I'm really coming home with you." "Promise?" The word hung in the air between them. Evelyn knew she shouldn't promise anything. She barely knew these people, had no idea what she was walking into, no guarantee this wasn't just trading one disaster for another. But looking at Wyatt's face, she couldn't bring herself to add another broken promise to his life. "I promise," she said. The hour passed in a blur. Martha's shop turned out to be a dry goods store packed with everything from bolts of fabric to canned foods to tools Evelyn couldn't identify. The back room was barely bigger than a closet, but it had what Martha promised, a basin of clean water and a cracked mirror. Evelyn washed her face and hands, tried to smooth the wrinkles from her dress, repinned her hair. The woman in the mirror still looked tired, but at least she looked slightly less like she'd been traveling for 3 days straight. "You sure about this?" Martha appeared in the doorway, the baby still on her hip. "Not even a little bit," Evelyn admitted. "Cole's a good man. Everyone knows it." Martha paused. "But he's been half dead since Sarah passed. That ranch is running on spite and stubbornness. I don't know what you're walking into out there." "I don't have a lot of other options. You could stay in town, work at the store maybe. It wouldn't pay much, but I'd still be here when Calvin comes back." Evelyn turned to face Martha. "That's what you're not saying, isn't it? That it's not safe for me here." Martha's silence was answer enough. 10 miles out sounds just fine then," Evelyn said. When she came back into the main shop, Cole was waiting with supplies loaded in a wagon. Wyatt sat in the back, swinging his 2 big boots and watching the door like he was afraid Evelyn might have vanished. His face lit up when he saw her. "Ready?" Cole asked. "As I'll ever be." The ride north was quiet at first. The wagon rattled over a road that was barely more than packed dirt, winding through landscape that looked like nothing Evelyn had ever seen. The mountains loomed larger the farther they went, purple and gray and capped with snow that never seemed to melt entirely. Pine forests gave way to open valleys where cattle grazed in scattered groups. The sky stretched overhead in a way that made her feel both exposed and insignificant. "It's so open," Evelyn said finally, just to break the silence. "Gets to some people," Cole said. He handled the reins with the easy confidence of someone who'd been doing it his whole life. City folk especially. They don't like having all that space pressing down on them. "I didn't say I didn't like it." "Didn't say you did either." Evelyn glanced at him. His profile was sharp against the sky, and she noticed things she'd missed on the platform. The scar along his jaw, the way his shoulders carried tension like a physical weight, the careful distance he maintained even while sitting right next to her. "How long have you been ranching?" she asked. "All my life. This land belonged to my father, and his father before that. Been Hale land for near about 40 years. And your wife, Sarah, did she grow up here too?" Cole's hands tightened on the reins. For a moment, Evelyn thought he wouldn't answer. "No," he said finally. "She came from back east, Pennsylvania. Met her when I was hauling cattle to market in Cheyenne. She was visiting her aunt." His voice went softer. "Prettiest thing I'd ever seen. Smart, too. Too smart to marry a rancher and move out to the middle of nowhere, but she did anyway. She must have loved you." "She did." The words sounded like an admission of guilt. "More than I deserved, probably." "Miss Evelyn?" Wyatt's voice piped up from the back of the wagon. "Are you going to be our new mama?" "Wyatt," Cole's voice sharpened. "That's not—" "I'm going to be helping your father for a while," Evelyn said, turning to look at the boy. "Taking care of the house and cooking meals, that's all." "But you'll stay with us? For now?" "How long is for now?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart." Wyatt absorbed this, his small face serious. Mama said, for now, the night before she got real sick, and then she went away forever. The words landed like stones. Evelyn saw Cole's jaw clench, saw the muscle jumping beneath the skin. She wanted to say something reassuring, something that would ease the fear in Wyatt's eyes, but what could she say? She was temporary. She would leave eventually. Making promises otherwise would just be another lie. I'll stay as long as I can, she said instead. That's the best I can promise. Wyatt nodded slowly, like he was trying to decide if that was good enough. Then he scooted forward, pressing against Evelyn's back, his small hand gripping the fabric of her dress. They didn't talk much after that. The sun was starting to sink toward the mountains when the ranch finally came into view. It sat in a shallow valley, backed up against a line of trees and facing south toward open grazing land. The house was bigger than Evelyn expected. 2 stories with that wraparound porch Calvin had described in his letters. But the paint was peeling, the windows looked grimy, and part of the porch railing had collapsed and never been repaired. The barn was in better shape, but not by much. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Evelyn could see 3 men working near one of the fences. They looked up as the wagon approached, their expressions curious. That's Dutch Sam and Old Tom, Cole said, following her gaze. They help with the cattle. Good men. They won't bother you. And if they do? They won't. The way he said it left no room for argument. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and Cole jumped down, then reached up to help Evelyn. His hands were rough and warm, and he released her the moment her feet touched the ground. I'll show you inside, he said. The house smelled like dust and neglect. The front room was spacious, with a stone fireplace and furniture that looked handmade and sturdy. But everything was covered in a fine layer of grime, and the whole place had the hollow feeling of a space where people existed but didn't really live. Kitchen's through there, Cole said, pointing. Water pumps out back. Your room will be upstairs, second door on the left. Wyatt's is next to it. Mine's at the end of the hall. Separate floors, Evelyn noted. What? Nothing, just most ranchers would put the hired help down here. Cole's expression was unreadable. You're not just hired help, you're... He stopped, seemingly unsure how to finish. Just take the upstairs room. It's got a lock on the door, if that makes you feel better. It did, actually. I'll start dinner, Evelyn said, if you'll show me where things are. The kitchen was a disaster. Dishes piled in the sink, flour spilled across the counter, a skillet on the stove that looked like something had died in it. Evelyn rolled up her sleeves and got to work. 2 hours later, the kitchen was clean, and something that resembled a meal was cooking on the stove. It wasn't fancy, just beans and salt pork and cornbread, but it was hot, and it was edible, and that felt like a victory. Wyatt sat at the kitchen table watching her with the intensity of a guard dog. You really know how to cook, he said. I really do. Daddy can't cook. Everything he makes tastes like ash. Evelyn hid a smile. Well, that's what I'm here for. When Cole came in from the barn, he stopped in the doorway and just stared. The kitchen was warm and smelled like food and looked nothing like the wreck he'd left behind. Sit down, Evelyn said, ladling beans into bowls, before it gets cold. They ate in near silence. Cole and Wyatt attacked the food like they hadn't had a proper meal in months, which, Evelyn suspected, they probably hadn't. She picked at her own portion, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. 3 days on a train, the shock of Calvin's betrayal, the long ride north, all of it was catching up to her at once. This is real good, Cole said finally. It's beans. Best beans I've had in a while. After dinner, Evelyn insisted on cleaning up while Cole took Wyatt upstairs to bed. She could hear them moving around overhead, the murmur of voices, the creak of floorboards. When Cole came back down, she was wiping down the counter one final time. He wanted you to tuck him in, Cole said. I told him you were busy. I don't mind. You should. You've done enough for one day. Evelyn set down the rag. Can I ask you something? Depends on the question. Why did you offer me the job? Really? It wasn't just because Wyatt grabbed hold of me. Cole leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He was quiet for a long moment, and Evelyn thought he might not answer. I knew one of the other girls, he said finally. The second one, Beth. She was 19 years old and scared out of her mind when she showed up. Calvin played with her for a week before she ran. I found her hiding in my barn one night, trying to figure out how to steal a horse to get away. I gave her money for a ticket east instead. That was kind of you. It wasn't kind. It was the bare minimum of human decency. His voice had gone hard. And I swore if another girl showed up, I wouldn't just stand by and watch what happened. So you're saving me. I'm offering you work. There's a difference. Is there? Cole pushed off the doorframe. Get some rest, Miss Mercer. Tomorrow starts early on a ranch. He was gone before she could respond. Upstairs, Evelyn's room was small but clean. Someone, Cole probably, had left a lantern burning on the dresser. The bed was narrow and the mattress lumpy, but after 3 days of sleeping upright in train cars, it looked like paradise. She changed into her nightgown, washed her face in the basin, and climbed into bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Wyatt shifting restlessly in the next room. Not quite awake, not quite asleep. Evelyn stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled. The wind rattled the windows, and for the first time since stepping off that train, Evelyn allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. She'd been abandoned, humiliated, left stranded in a place where everyone knew she was Calvin Rourke's latest joke. But she was also here, in this house, with a job and a roof and at least temporary safety. It wasn't what she'd expected, it wasn't what she'd planned, but it was something. And something, she thought as she finally drifted toward sleep, was better than the nothing she'd left behind in Chicago. Evelyn woke to the sound of something breaking downstairs. She sat up fast, heart hammering, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The room was wrong, the sounds were wrong, everything felt tilted and strange. Then it came back in a rush. Montana. The ranch. Cole Hale's house. Another crash from below, followed by a muffled curse. She threw back the covers and grabbed her shawl, wrapping it over her nightgown as she hurried into the hallway. Wyatt's door was open, his bed empty. Panic spiked through her chest as she rushed down the stairs, bare feet silent on the worn wood. The kitchen was chaos. Wyatt stood on a chair pulled up to the counter, surrounded by broken eggs and spilled flour. He'd apparently been trying to reach something on the high shelf and knocked over half the pantry in the process. His face was streaked with tears and what looked like raw egg. "I was trying to make breakfast," he said, voice small and miserable. "Like Mama used to." Evelyn's panic dissolved into something softer and more painful. She crossed the kitchen, stepping carefully around the mess. "Oh, sweetheart. I wanted to help. I wanted to show Daddy I could—" His voice cracked. "But I can't do anything right. I can't do anything without her." "That's not true." Evelyn helped him down from the chair, then knelt so they were eye level. "You tried. That's what matters. But I made a mess. I always make messes now." Fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "Daddy says I need to be strong, but I don't know how to be strong without Mama." Evelyn pulled him into a hug, feeling his small body shake against hers. Through the window, she could see the sky beginning to lighten, that strange purple gray that came before dawn. Somewhere outside, a rooster crowed. "Tell you what," she said, "how about we clean this up together and then you can help me make breakfast the right way? I'll teach you." Wyatt pulled back, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Really?" "Really. But first we need to get this kitchen sorted before your father sees it." They worked quickly and quietly. Evelyn swept up the broken eggs while Wyatt carefully put the flour back in its container. By the time Cole's boots sounded on the stairs, the kitchen looked almost normal again. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene with that unreadable expression he seemed to wear like armor. His hair was wet. He'd already been up and washed at the pump outside. His shirt was buttoned wrong. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep?" Evelyn lied smoothly. "Thought I'd get a head start on breakfast." Cole's eyes flicked to Wyatt, who was trying very hard to look innocent, then back to Evelyn. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Well, I won't argue with that." He grabbed his hat from the peg by the door. "I'll be out checking the fence line. Should be back around noon." "I'll pack you something to take. Don't need—" "You'll take it anyway." Evelyn was already moving toward the pantry. "Unless you plan on working through lunch again." Cole opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Yes, ma'am. After he left, Wyatt looked up at Evelyn with something like awe. Nobody tells Daddy what to do. I wasn't telling. I was suggesting firmly. What's the difference? The difference is he'll eat lunch today. They made breakfast together. Real breakfast, with eggs that didn't end up on the floor and biscuits that actually rose in the oven. Wyatt watched everything Evelyn did with the intensity of a student preparing for an exam, asking questions about measurements and timing and why you had to let the dough rest. Mama used to let me help sometimes, he said, carefully stirring the eggs like they might explode if you moved too fast. But then she got sick and Daddy said I needed to stay away so I wouldn't catch it too. That must have been hard. I snuck in anyway. At night, when Daddy was asleep. I just wanted to sit with her. His voice went quiet. She didn't know I was there, I don't think. She kept talking to people who weren't in the room, and she was so hot, like touching a stove. Evelyn's throat tightened. She remembered her own mother's death, the pneumonia that had turned her lips blue and filled her lungs with fluid until she drowned on dry land. She remembered the helplessness of watching someone slip away and being unable to do anything but hold their hand. I'm sure she knew, Evelyn said softly. Even when people are that sick, they know when someone they love is nearby. You think so? I know so. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, and then Wyatt helped her wash the dishes before Cole called him out to do his morning chores. Through the window, Evelyn watched them walk toward the barn together. Cole's stride long and purposeful, Wyatt half running to keep up. The boy's hand kept reaching for his father's, then dropping away before making contact. The house felt too quiet after they left. Evelyn spent the morning doing what she did best, taking chaos and beating it into submission through sheer stubborn work. She scrubbed floors that probably hadn't been properly cleaned since Sarah died. She washed windows until they actually let light through. She found a broom and attacked the cobwebs that had taken over every corner. The work was mindless and exhausting, and exactly what she needed. Around noon, she heard horses approaching, multiple riders from the sound of it. Evelyn dried her hands on her apron and went to the front door, suddenly aware that she was alone in a house 10 miles from town and had no idea who might be coming up that road. 3 men rode into the yard, not Cole and his ranch hands, but strangers. 2 looked like cowboys, dusty and tired. The third was different. He sat his horse like someone who'd never done real work in his life, his clothes too clean and too expensive for ranch country. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She'd never seen Calvin Rourke in person, but she recognized him anyway. He looked exactly like his photograph. Neat hair, careful features, eyes that assessed her like she was livestock at auction. Up close, though, she could see things the camera had hidden. The weak chin, the soft hands, the cruel little smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Well, Calvin said, dismounting with practiced ease. The lost bride appears. Evelyn forced herself to stand straight, even though everything in her wanted to retreat back into the house and bar the door. Mr. Rourke! You remembered my name. How flattering. He handed his reins to one of his men and approached the porch. I apologize for missing your arrival. Business called me away unexpectedly. You knew I was coming. Did I? His expression was all innocence. How strange. I could have sworn I sent a telegram postponing your visit. You sent no such thing. Are you certain? The telegraph office in Hollow Creek is notoriously unreliable. He climbed the porch steps, and Evelyn had to fight the urge to back away. But you seem to have landed on your feet, or should I say, landed in Cole Hale's bed. The accusation hit like a slap. I'm working here, nothing more. Of course you are. Calvin's smile widened. Just like you were planning to work as my wife, for room and board and the privilege of warming my bed. Let's not play games, Miss Mercer. We both know what you are. A desperate woman willing to sell herself to the first man who'd have her. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, something expensive that made her stomach turn. The question is, what kind of arrangement have you made with Cole? Because I'd be happy to match any offer he's made. In fact, I'd be willing to improve on it significantly. Get off this property. I don't think so. Calvin reached out, and Evelyn jerked back before he could touch her. His expression darkened. I paid for your train ticket, your meals, your transportation. You owe me a debt, Miss Mercer, and I intend to collect. I owe you nothing. The law might disagree. Breach of contract is a serious matter, even out here in the wilderness. There was no contract, wasn't there? He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. I believe you'll find your signature on this letter of agreement, the one where you promised to marry me in exchange for passage west. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She'd signed letters, friendly, informal letters that talked about looking forward to meeting him and building a life together, but she'd never signed any legal document. That's a forgery. Prove it. Calvin's smile was sharp as broken glass. I'm a respected businessman in Hollow Creek. You're a whore who jumped into another man's bed the moment you arrived. Who do you think the sheriff will believe? The word hit her like a physical blow. Evelyn felt her face burn, felt rage and humiliation warring in her chest. She wanted to hit him, wanted to scream, wanted to prove she was better than the desperate woman he clearly thought she was. But before she could do any of that, a voice cut across the yard. You got about 5 seconds to get back on that horse. Cole stood near the barn, and he wasn't alone. Dutch, Sam, and Old Tom flanked him, and all 4 men wore expressions that suggested violence was only a breath away. Calvin's easy confidence flickered. Hale, I was just collecting what belongs to me. Nothing here belongs to you. The lady and I had an agreement. The lady is employed by me. You got a problem with that, take it up with the sheriff. Cole moved closer, each step deliberate and dangerous. But right now, you're trespassing. And in Montana, we got laws about what a man can do to trespassers on his land. The 2 cowboys who'd ridden with Calvin shifted uncomfortably. They weren't gunfighters, Evelyn realized, just hired men who probably wanted no part of whatever was building in this yard. Calvin seemed to realize he was outmatched, but his smile never wavered. Of course. I wouldn't dream of causing trouble. He turned back to Evelyn. We'll continue this conversation later, Miss Mercer, when you're feeling more reasonable. Don't come back here, Cole said. This is a free country, Hale. I'll ride where I please. Not on my land, you won't. For a moment, the air felt charged with potential violence. Then Calvin laughed, a sound with no humor in it, and remounted his horse. Enjoy your new housemaid, Cole. I hope she's worth the trouble she's going to bring down on you. They rode off at an easy trot, and Evelyn watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her dress, trying to steady herself, trying to push down the fear and anger churning in her stomach. Cole climbed the porch steps. You all right? Fine. That's not what I asked. Evelyn turned to face him. He said I signed a contract. He showed me a document with my signature on it. Was it your signature? It looked like it, but I never signed any legal agreement, just letters, friendly correspondence. He probably traced your handwriting from one of those letters. Cole leaned against the porch railing, his expression grim. Calvin's good at that kind of thing, making lies look legal. Can he actually do anything with it? Depends on the judge, and depends on how much money Calvin's willing to spend to make your life hell. He was quiet for a moment. This is my fault. I should have realized he'd come here. How is this your fault? Because everyone knows I don't tolerate Calvin's bullshit. He probably figured putting you on my land would be a way to get at both of us. That's insane. That's Calvin. Cole pushed off the railing. You should know something. 3 years back, he and I had a disagreement about water rights. He tried to divert the creek that runs through my property, claim it as his. I stopped him. Made him look like a fool in front of half the territory. He's the kind of man who remembers that sort of thing. So this is revenge. Partly. The rest is just him being who he is. Cole met her eyes. I meant what I told him. You're under my protection as long as you're on this ranch, but you should know that protection's going to come with consequences. What kind of consequences? The kind where everyone in Hollow Creek starts talking, where your reputation gets worse instead of better, where people assume things about why you're really here. He said it bluntly, without sugarcoating. You might want to consider moving on. Going somewhere Calvin's reach doesn't extend. Evelyn thought about running, about buying a ticket to somewhere new, somewhere no one knew her story. It would be easier, safer, probably, but she was so tired of running. I'm staying, she said. You sure about that? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Something shifted in Cole's expression, surprise, maybe, or respect. All right then, but from now on, you don't go anywhere alone, not even to town. And if Calvin shows up here again, you get inside and you lock the doors. Understand? I can take care of myself. I don't doubt that. But I also don't trust Calvin not to do something stupid if he gets you alone. Cole started down the steps, then stopped. That thing he called you, you know it's not true, right? Evelyn's throat tightened. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what people believe. Then we'll just have to make them believe something different. He walked back toward the barn, leaving Evelyn alone on the porch, with her thoughts and her fear and the strange, unexpected warmth that came from knowing someone was willing to fight for her. The rest of the day passed in uneasy normalcy. Wyatt came in for lunch and chattered about the new calf born that morning, apparently oblivious to the earlier confrontation. Cole worked until dark, coming in only when Evelyn rang the dinner bell she'd found buried in a kitchen drawer. They ate beef stew and cornbread, and Evelyn noticed that Cole actually cleaned his plate instead of picking at his food like he was too tired to eat. Wyatt fell asleep at the table halfway through dessert, dried apple pie that wasn't quite as good as Evelyn wanted it to be, but no one complained. Cole carried his son upstairs while Evelyn cleaned up. When he came back down, she was wiping the counter for the second time, mostly just to have something to do with her hands. "You don't have to work yourself to death," Cole said. "I'm not. I'm just thorough." "That what you call it?" He poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "Sarah used to do that, clean the same spot over and over when she was worried about something." "I'm not worried." "You're a terrible liar." Evelyn set down the rag. "Fine. I'm worried." "Happy?" "Not particularly." He took a sip of coffee, made a face. "This is awful." "Then don't drink it." "Didn't say I wouldn't drink it. Just said it was awful." He drained the cup anyway. "You want to know what you're up against with Calvin?" "I'm not sure I do. Probably smart. But I'm going to tell you anyway." Cole refilled his cup, then settled into one of the kitchen chairs like he was preparing for a long story. Calvin's family owned half the businesses in Hollow Creek at one point. His father was the kind of man who believed money could buy anything: respect, influence, people. When he died, Calvin inherited everything. The problem is Calvin inherited his father's beliefs but none of his intelligence. He seems smart enough. He's clever. There's the difference. Smart men build things. Clever men find ways to tear down what others built and claim it for themselves. Cole stared into his coffee like he was reading tea leaves. 5 years ago, Calvin decided he wanted to expand his holdings. Started offering loans to ranchers and farmers who were struggling. Generous terms, low interest. Everyone thought he was being charitable. But he wasn't. He was buying leverage. The moment someone missed a payment, he'd call in the debt. Suddenly, you'd owe him twice what you borrowed, and if you couldn't pay, he'd take your land, your livestock, whatever he could get his hands on. That's legal? When you write the contracts, you can make almost anything legal. Cole's voice had gone flat. He tried it on me after Sarah died. Offered me money to cover medical expenses, funeral costs. Acted like he was doing me a favor. I told him I'd rather burn my ranch to the ground than owe him a cent. That must have gone over well. About as well as you'd expect. He's been looking for ways to hurt me ever since. He finally looked up at her. That's what you are to him. Not a bride, not even a woman. Just another way to get at someone who embarrassed him. The word should have stung, but somehow they didn't. Maybe because Evelyn had already figured that out on her own. "So what do I do?" she asked. "You keep your head down. You stay on this ranch, and you let me handle Calvin if he comes around again. That's it? Just hide?" "You got a better idea?" Evelyn didn't. But the thought of spending the next however many months cowering on this ranch, waiting for Calvin to make his next move, made something in her chest rebel. "I could leave," she said quietly. "Move on to somewhere else. That would solve your problem. It would solve Calvin's problem, which is exactly why you shouldn't do it." Cole stood, carrying his cup to the sink. "He wants you scared, wants you running. The moment you do that, he wins. And if I stay, then we both look him in the eye and dare him to do something about it." The way he said "we" made something warm unfold in Evelyn's chest. She'd spent so much of her life alone, fighting her own battles, that the idea of someone standing beside her felt almost foreign. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. This could get a lot uglier before it gets better." He was right about that. The next morning, Evelyn woke to find Wyatt already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with red eyes and a trembling lower lip. "What's wrong?" She was at his side in an instant. "Are you hurt?" "I had a bad dream." His voice was barely a whisper. "About Mama. About the night she—" He couldn't finish. Evelyn pulled him into a hug, and he clung to her with the desperate strength of someone drowning. His small body shook with sobs that sounded too big for his chest to hold. "It's all right," she murmured. "It's all right, sweetheart. It was just a dream." But it wasn't. It was real. She really did. She really— Another sob cut him off. Evelyn held him tighter, rocking slowly, the way her mother used to when Evelyn was small and frightened. She didn't tell him it would be okay because she'd learned young that some things never really became okay. You just learned to carry them differently. Eventually, Wyatt's sobs quieted to hiccups. He pulled back, wiping his eyes on his sleeve. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Don't be. Daddy says men don't cry." "Your daddy is full of horse shit." Wyatt's eyes went wide, and then, miracle of miracles, he giggled. The sound was watery and broken, but it was genuine. "You said a bad word," he said. "I did. Don't tell your father." "I won't." He took a shaky breath. "Miss Evelyn, do you think Mama would be mad that I like you?" The question pierced something in Evelyn's chest. "Why would she be mad?" "Because I'm supposed to miss her. And I do miss her. But sometimes when you're here, I don't feel as sad, and that makes me feel bad, like I'm forgetting her." Evelyn knelt so they were eye level. "Listen to me. Your mama loved you more than anything in the world, and you know what people who love you want? They want you to be happy. They want you to laugh and play and feel joy. Missing her and liking me aren't opposites. You can do both at the same time." "Really?" "Really." She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "Your mama would be glad you're not sad all the time anymore. Trust me on that." Wyatt thought about this, his small face serious. Then he nodded and threw his arms around her neck in a quick, fierce hug before pulling away. "Can we make pancakes?" "We can absolutely make pancakes." They were mixing batter when Cole came in from his early chores. He took in the scene, Wyatt standing on a chair, carefully pouring flour while Evelyn supervised, and something softened in his expression. "Smells good in here," he said. "We're making breakfast," Wyatt announced proudly. "I'm helping." "I can see that." Cole hung his hat on the peg. "Anything I can do?" "You can sit down and stay out of the way," Evelyn said, "unless you want to risk another flour explosion." "There was a flour explosion?" "There was not," Wyatt said quickly. "Nothing exploded. Miss Evelyn is making things up." Cole's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. He sat at the table and watched them work, and for a moment the kitchen felt almost peaceful, like a real home instead of a place where people just existed. After breakfast, Cole announced he needed to ride into Hollow Creek for supplies. "Should take most of the day," he said. "You two will be all right here?" "We'll be fine," Evelyn said, even though the thought of being alone on the ranch made her nervous after yesterday's confrontation with Calvin. Cole seemed to read her mind. "Dutch and the others are working the north pasture. Anything feels wrong, you ring that bell and they'll come running." "We'll be fine," she repeated, more firmly this time. After he left, Evelyn threw herself into work with renewed determination. She tackled the upstairs rooms that had been closed off since Sarah's death, guest bedrooms filled with dusty furniture and air that tasted stale. Wyatt helped, chattering about his mother as they worked. "She used to sing all the time," he said, dragging sheets off a bed. "Even when she was doing boring stuff like laundry. Daddy says she had the prettiest voice in Montana." "What did she sing?" "Everything. Songs from church. Songs her mama taught her back in Pennsylvania. Sometimes she'd make up songs about whatever she was doing, like, 'I'm washing dishes, getting these plates all clean.'" He sang it in a high, wobbly voice that made Evelyn smile. "She sounds like she was wonderful." She was. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "Do you sing?" "Not if anyone's listening." "Why not?" "Because I sound like a cat being strangled." Wyatt giggled. "I bet you don't." "I absolutely do. Ask your father when he gets back." They were carrying armloads of linens downstairs when Evelyn heard horses again. Her heart jumped into her throat, but when she looked out the window, she saw it wasn't Calvin. It was Martha from the dry goods store, driving a wagon with two other women Evelyn didn't recognize. "Stay inside," Evelyn told Wyatt. even though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to be cautious. She met them on the porch. Martha climbed down from the wagon, her expression carefully neutral. "Afternoon," Martha said. "Thought we'd stop by and see how you were settling in." "That's kind of you." Evelyn stayed on the porch, suddenly aware that she was covered in dust and probably looked half wild. "These are my friends, Alice Brennan and Margaret Chen. We wanted to—" Martha trailed off, glancing at the other women. "Well, we wanted to make sure you knew what you were getting into." "Getting into?" One of the other women, Alice maybe, stepped forward. She was older, with gray threading through her hair, and a face that had seen its share of hard years. "Word spreading in town about you and Cole Hale." "There is no me and Cole Hale." "That's not what people are saying." Margaret Chen spoke with a slight accent, her dark eyes sharp. "They're saying you moved out here the same day you arrived, that you're sharing his house, his bed. I work for him, that's all." "Doesn't matter what the truth is," Alice said. "Matters what people believe. And right now, they believe you're either his mistress or looking to trap him into marriage." The words hit like stones. Evelyn felt her face burn. I would never." "We know," Martha said quickly. "Or at least we think we know. But Calvin Rourke's been spending the last 2 days in town telling anyone who'll listen that you're a gold digger who seduced Cole the moment you got off the train." "That's not true." "We're not saying it is. We're saying it doesn't matter." Martha's voice was gentle but firm. "Out here, reputation is everything, especially for a woman, and right now yours is being shredded." Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to scream that she'd done nothing wrong, that she was just trying to survive, that it wasn't fair. But she'd learned young that life wasn't fair, and screaming about it wouldn't change anything. "What should I do?" she asked. The three women exchanged glances. Finally, Margaret spoke. "You should come to town. Be seen in public. Let people see you're respectable." "Calvin's in town." "Which is exactly why you need to go. Show everyone you're not afraid of him. Show them you're not hiding out here like you've got something to be ashamed of." It made sense in a twisted way, but the thought of walking through Hollow Creek with everyone staring and whispering made Evelyn's stomach turn. "I'll think about it," she said. "Don't think too long," Alice warned. "The longer you stay out here, the worse the rumors get." After they left, Evelyn stood on the porch for a long time, watching the dust from their wagon settle. Inside, she could hear Wyatt playing with something, humming tunelessly to himself. Everything felt fragile suddenly, like she'd built a house of cards and someone was about to sneeze. Cole returned just before sunset, wagon loaded with supplies and his expression grim. "How bad was it?" Evelyn asked, helping him unload. "Bad?" He handed her a sack of flour. "Calvin's been busy. Half the town thinks you're a whore. The other half thinks you're a con artist trying to trick me out of my ranch." "Which half do you think believes I'm both?" Cole's mouth twitched despite the seriousness of the situation. "Fair point." He grabbed another sack. "There's talk about bringing you before the town council. Calvin's pushing for it. Claims you owe him money and you're trying to evade your debts by hiding on my ranch." "That's insane. That's politics." He set the sack down heavily. "The council meets next week. You'll need to attend. Answer questions. Defend yourself." "In front of the whole town?" "Unless you've got a better idea." Evelyn didn't. But the thought of standing in front of all those people, defending her character while they stared at her like she was on trial, made her want to run, made her want to disappear into the mountains and never come back. "I'll do it," she heard herself say. Cole studied her face. "You sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." That night, after Wyatt was in bed, Evelyn sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The sky was so much bigger here than in Chicago, so much darker, so much more beautiful and terrifying at the same time. She heard the door open behind her, heard Cole's boots on the wood. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much to think about." He sat down beside her, not too close, but not too far either. They were quiet for a while, just listening to the night sounds, crickets and distant coyotes, and the wind moving through the grass. "Thank you," Evelyn said finally, "for letting me stay, for standing up for me." "You didn't have to do any of that." "Yeah, I did." "Why?" Cole was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because watching what Calvin does to women and doing nothing about it makes me complicit. And I'm tired of feeling complicit in things I know are wrong. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. He stood, preparing to head back inside. Get some sleep, Evelyn. Next week's going to be hard. She stayed on the porch long after he'd gone, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead and wondering what the hell she'd gotten herself into. The week crawled by like something wounded. Evelyn threw herself into work, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from circling the same terrified thoughts. She scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, baked bread no one asked for, reorganized the pantry twice. Wyatt followed her around like a shadow, chattering about everything and nothing, somehow sensing that she needed the distraction even if he didn't understand why. Cole spent most of his time outside, working himself nearly to collapse. He came in for meals silent and exhausted, his eyes hollow. The ranch hands gave him space, speaking only when spoken to, moving through their work with unusual care. Even Dutch, who normally couldn't shut up to save his life, kept his mouth closed and his head down. Everyone was waiting for something to break. It happened on Thursday afternoon. Evelyn was hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the direction of the barn. She dropped the shirt she'd been pinning and ran toward the noise, her heart already racing. She found Cole and Dutch standing over what was left of the north fence. Someone had cut clean through the wire in a dozen places, letting an entire section collapse. Beyond the broken fence, she could see cattle scattered across the valley, wandering loose and stupid in that way cattle had. When did this happen? Cole's voice was quiet, which somehow made it more frightening than if he'd been yelling. Sometime last night, Dutch said. He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Had to be after midnight. Sam and I did a perimeter check around 11, and everything was solid. So someone came onto my land in the middle of the night and deliberately destroyed my fence. Looks that way. Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring at the damage. Then he turned and saw Evelyn standing there. Something crossed his face, anger mixed with something that looked almost like regret. Get back to the house, he said. What are you going to do? What I should have done the first time Calvin showed up here. He started toward the barn. Dutch, get the others. We're going to town. Cole, wait. Evelyn hurried after him. You can't just... What are you planning to do? I'm planning to have a conversation. With your fists? He stopped, turning to face her. You got a better idea? Yes. Wait until the council meeting. Present this as evidence. Show everyone what he's doing. And in the meantime, what happens when he comes back and does something worse? What happens when it's not just a fence? Cole's voice was rising now, the careful control slipping. You think I'm going to sit here and wait for him to burn down my barn? Hurt my son? Hurt you. I think charging into town looking for a fight is exactly what he wants you to do. He's trying to provoke you, make you look like the aggressor. I don't care how I look. Well, maybe you should. Evelyn stepped closer, forcing herself to meet his eyes, even though her hands were shaking. Because this isn't just about you anymore. Wyatt needs his father, and he needs his father to not be in jail or worse because he couldn't control his temper. The words landed like a slap. Cole's jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. You don't understand, he said finally. I understand perfectly. I understand that Calvin is trying to turn you into exactly the kind of man he tells everyone you are. Violent, unpredictable, dangerous. And if you go to town right now, you'll prove him right. They stood there staring at each other, the destroyed fence stretched out behind them like evidence of everything wrong with this situation. Finally, Cole looked away. Fix the fence, he told Dutch. I'll help you round up the cattle after I cool down. He walked away without looking at Evelyn again, his shoulders rigid with suppressed rage. Dutch watched him go, then turned to Evelyn with something like respect in his eyes. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen a woman do, he said. Probably both. Evelyn's legs felt shaky. Will he listen, or will he just wait until I'm not watching and go anyway? Honestly, I don't know. Cole's been wound tight as a spring since Sarah died. Might be he needs to hit something. Might be you just saved him from doing something real stupid. Dutch picked up a coil of wire. Either way, you should probably stay clear of him for a while. But Evelyn couldn't stay clear. That evening, when Cole didn't come in for dinner, she made him a plate and carried it out to the barn. She found him in the tack room, methodically cleaning a rifle that probably didn't need cleaning. You need to eat, she said, setting the plate on the workbench. Not hungry. I don't care if you're hungry. You need to eat anyway. Cole didn't look up from the rifle. You always this stubborn? You always this self-destructive? That got his attention. He set down the cleaning rag and finally met her eyes. I'm trying real hard not to do something I'll regret. You standing here arguing with me isn't helping. Good. Maybe if you're arguing with me, you won't be riding into town looking for Calvin. You think you know me that well? I think I know men who are looking for an excuse to break something, and I think you're dangerously close to finding that excuse. Cole stood, and Evelyn forced herself not to step back, even though he was close enough that she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. You want to know what I'm close to? I'm close to losing everything I've got left. This ranch, my son's safety, my own sanity. And the woman responsible for helping me keep it together is the same woman who brought all this trouble to my door in the first place. The words cut deeper than Evelyn expected. She felt something cold settle in her stomach. If you want me to leave, just say so. I don't want you to leave. He said it like an accusation. That's the problem. I should want you gone. Should want you as far from here as possible, but I don't. Why not? Because... He stopped, jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. Because Wyatt's been sleeping through the night for the first time since Sarah died. Because the house doesn't feel like a tomb anymore. Because I haven't wanted to drink myself unconscious in 3 weeks, which is a record since the funeral. Evelyn's throat tightened. Cole, and because looking at you makes me feel things I got no business feeling about my dead wife's replacement. The confession hung in the air between them like smoke. Evelyn couldn't breathe properly. Couldn't think past the sudden, fierce awareness of how close he was standing, how his eyes were searching her face like he was looking for something he'd lost. I'm not her replacement, Evelyn said quietly. I know that. Do you? I'm trying to. He turned away, putting distance between them. You should go back to the house. What about your dinner? I'll eat later. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to push, wanted to make him talk about what he'd just admitted. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, could practically feel the effort it was taking him to hold himself together. So she left the plate on the workbench and walked back to the house, her heart hammering against her ribs. The next 3 days were unbearable. Cole avoided her as much as possible, speaking only when necessary and never meeting her eyes. Wyatt noticed the tension and grew quiet, his earlier progress evaporating like morning dew. The house felt heavy with unspoken words and suppressed feelings. Then Monday arrived, bringing with it the town council meeting. Evelyn dressed carefully that morning in her best dress, the only nice thing she owned, brought from Chicago and barely worn. It was dark blue with a high collar and long sleeves, respectable and modest. She pinned her hair up severely, trying to look as proper as possible. Cole waited by the wagon, wearing clothes she'd never seen him in. A clean shirt, pressed trousers, a jacket that looked uncomfortable on his broad shoulders. He helped her up without speaking, then lifted Wyatt into the back. You don't have to come, Evelyn said as they started down the road. This isn't your fight. Like hell it isn't. His voice was flat. Calvin made it my fight when he cut my fence. The ride to Hollow Creek felt both too long and too short. Evelyn's stomach churned with nerves. Her hands were sweating inside her gloves. She kept rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd defend herself, but every imagined scenario ended with humiliation and failure. Stop spiraling, Cole said without looking at her. I'm not... You are. I can practically hear you thinking. He guided the wagon around a rut in the road. Just tell the truth. That's all you can do. What if the truth isn't enough? Then the truth isn't enough. But at least you'll know you tried. Hollow Creek looked exactly the same as the day she'd arrived, but somehow smaller now. The buildings seemed to lean in as they passed, and Evelyn could feel eyes watching from windows and doorways. Word had spread about the meeting. Of course it had. In a town this size, a public spectacle was better than theater. The town hall was a squat wooden building at the end of Main Street. Already people were gathering outside, ranchers and shopkeepers and housewives, all dressed in their Sunday best and wearing expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. Evelyn saw Martha near the door and felt a small surge of relief. At least she'd have one friendly face in the crowd. Calvin stood on the hall steps, surrounded by men in expensive suits. He looked every inch the respectable businessman, clean-shaven, well-dressed, confident. When he saw Cole's wagon approaching, His face split into a smile that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "The guest of honor arrives," he called out, "and she brought her benefactor. How touching." Cole jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Evelyn. His hand was steady on her arm, his voice low. "Don't let him get to you. That's what he wants." "I know." But knowing and doing were different things. As they walked toward the hall, Evelyn felt the weight of all those stares, heard the whispers that weren't quite quiet enough. Whore, gold digger, thief. The words followed her like flies. Inside, the hall was packed. Chairs had been set up facing a long table where 5 men sat. The town council, Evelyn assumed. They looked like every other small-town authority she'd ever seen, middle-aged, self-important, and already convinced they knew the truth. Cole guided Evelyn to a seat near the front, with Wyatt pressed close against his side. The boy's eyes were huge, taking in the crowd with obvious anxiety. "It's going to be all right," Evelyn whispered to him, even though she didn't believe it herself. The head councilman, a heavy-set man with mutton-chop sideburns, banged a gavel against the table. "This meeting will come to order. We're here to address a complaint filed by Calvin Rourke against Miss Evelyn Mercer regarding breach of contract and unpaid debts." Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. This was really happening. Calvin stood, moving to the front of the room with practiced ease. "Gentlemen, thank you for hearing this matter. I'll be brief, as the facts speak for themselves." He pulled papers from his jacket. "Last December, I placed an advertisement seeking a wife through a respectable correspondence service. Miss Mercer responded. Over the following months, we exchanged numerous letters in which she agreed to travel west and marry me in exchange for passage, lodging, and financial security." He held up one of the letters. Even from where she sat, Evelyn could see her handwriting. "I purchased her train ticket at considerable expense, $73. I arranged for her meals and accommodations along the journey. I did everything a gentleman should do when bringing a bride west." Calvin's voice took on a wounded tone. "And how was I repaid? The moment Miss Mercer arrived, she abandoned our agreement and moved directly into the home of Cole Hale, a known rival of mine." "That's not—" Evelyn started to stand, but Cole's hand on her arm stopped her. "You'll get your turn," he murmured. Calvin continued, warming to his performance. "I have reason to believe that Miss Mercer and Mr. Hale conspired together to defraud me, that their arrangement predated her arrival, that the entire correspondence was a ruse designed to extract money and resources from me while humiliating me publicly." The room erupted in murmurs. Evelyn felt heat flood her face. How could he stand there and lie so smoothly? How could he twist everything into something unrecognizable? "I have here a signed contract," Calvin said, holding up another document, "clearly stating the terms of our agreement and Miss Mercer's obligations. She has violated every term. I'm seeking reimbursement for my expenses, plus damages for the harm done to my reputation." He sat down, looking satisfied. The head councilman turned to Evelyn. "Miss Mercer, you'll have a chance to respond." Evelyn stood on legs that felt like water. Every eye in the room fixed on her, and for a moment her mind went completely blank. Then she saw Wyatt looking up at her with those trusting eyes, and something steadied inside her. "I never signed a contract," she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "Mr. Rourke and I exchanged letters, yes. Friendly letters where we discussed the possibility of marriage. But there was never any legal agreement, no signatures on official documents, no contracts witnessed or notarized." "Then explain this." Calvin waved the paper. "I can't explain it because I've never seen it before. If that's my signature, it was forged or copied from one of my letters." "A convenient claim." "It's the truth." Evelyn forced herself to look at the council members. "I paid for my own train ticket. I have the receipt from the railway office in Chicago. As for Mr. Rourke's other expenses, I never asked him to pay for anything, never agreed to marry him in exchange for money. Our correspondence was about building a life together, not a financial transaction." One of the councilmen, younger than the others, with shrewd eyes, leaned forward. "Do you have these letters, the ones you exchanged?" "I do. Some of them, anyway. The ones I brought with me from Chicago." Evelyn pulled them from her bag, her hands shaking slightly. "You're welcome to read them. You'll see there's nothing about contracts or debts." Calvin's smile faltered just slightly. "Letters can be edited, rewritten." "Or forged," Evelyn shot back. Like that contract you're waving around. Miss Mercer, the head councilman interrupted, can you explain why you moved directly to the Hale Ranch upon arrival? This was the dangerous part. Evelyn chose her words carefully. Because Mr. Rourke wasn't at the station when I arrived. I was told he'd left town days earlier, knowing I was coming. I was stranded with limited funds and no prospects. Mr. Hale offered me employment, honest work for honest wages. I accepted because I had no other options. How convenient that Cole Hale happened to be there, Calvin said smoothly. How convenient that he offered you work the moment you arrived, almost as if it had been arranged. It wasn't arranged. It was desperation meeting opportunity. Evelyn turned to face Calvin directly. And you know that. You know exactly what happened because you planned it. You brought me here knowing you wouldn't be waiting, knowing I'd be stranded. You wanted to see what would happen, whether I'd beg you for help or find some other way to survive. That's absurd. Is it? Evelyn's voice was rising now, months of fear and humiliation boiling over. How many other women have you done this to? How many other brides have stepped off that train expecting to find you and found nothing? The room went silent. Calvin's expression darkened. I don't know what you're talking about. 3, Evelyn said. I was told there were 3 before me. 3 women you brought west and abandoned. One was robbed and disappeared. Another fled town, terrified. The third vanished entirely. She looked at the council. Has anyone investigated what happened to those women? Has anyone asked Calvin Rourke why he keeps bringing brides west only to abandon them? Those women have nothing to do with this case, Calvin said tightly. They have everything to do with it. They prove a pattern. They prove you're not looking for a wife. You're looking for victims. That's slander. It's the truth. A voice came from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see an older man standing, hat clutched in weathered hands. Name's Benjamin Carr. I worked for Mr. Rourke 5 years back. I was there when the first girl came through. Calvin's face went white. Ben, sit down. No, sir, I won't. Ben's voice was shaking but determined. I've kept quiet too long as it is. That girl, Melissa was her name. She was 17 years old, scared and alone. Mr. Rourke toyed with her for 3 days, making promises and breaking them, until someone robbed her of every cent she had. She left on foot in the middle of the night. I tried to help her, but she was too frightened to stay. You're a disgruntled former employee. I'm a man with a conscience. Ben's eyes blazed. And I'm not the only one. There's others here who know what you do, who've seen how you treat people. We've just been too scared of you to speak up. Martha stood. He's right. I've heard stories, seen things. Calvin Rourke uses his money and influence to hurt people, then hides behind respectability. Another voice joined in. Then another. Like a dam breaking, people started standing and speaking. Ranch hands who'd been cheated, shopkeepers who'd been threatened, women who'd been propositioned and insulted. The room filled with voices, years of suppressed testimony pouring out. Calvin tried to shout over them, but his voice was drowned in the tide. The councilman looked stunned, overwhelmed by the sudden rebellion. Finally, the head councilman banged his gavel hard enough to crack the table. Order! We'll have order! The room quieted, but the damage was done. Calvin stood in the middle of it all, his carefully constructed image crumbling around him like a house made of cards. This meeting is adjourned, the head councilman said, his voice uncertain. We'll need time to review all this new information. Miss Mercer, you're free to go for now. Mr. Rourke will want to speak with you privately. Calvin's eyes found Evelyn across the room. The hatred in them was pure and cold. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yeah, it is. Cole stepped between them, his voice like iron. You're done, Calvin. Everyone knows what you are now. Whatever power you had in this town, you just lost it. You think so? You think these people matter? Calvin's laugh was ugly. I own half the mortgages in this county. I control the water rights. One word from me and half these ranchers lose everything. Then say it. See what happens when you push people who've got nothing left to lose. For a moment, Evelyn thought Calvin might actually attack Cole right there in the town hall. His fists clenched, his face went red, and something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. But then he seemed to master himself. He straightened his jacket, picked up his papers, and walked toward the door. Watch your back, Hale, he said without turning around. Both of you." The threat hung in the air long after he'd gone. Outside, the crowd dispersed slowly, people lingering to talk in hushed voices. Martha caught up with Evelyn as she was climbing into the wagon. "That was brave," Martha said. "Stupid, maybe, but brave." "I didn't have a choice." "We always have choices. You chose to fight." She glanced toward where Calvin's carriage was disappearing down the street. "Just be careful. He's at his most dangerous when he's cornered." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Wyatt had fallen asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted by the tension. Cole drove with his jaw clenched, scanning the horizon like he expected an ambush. "You were right," he said finally. "About waiting, about not going after him myself. I'm not sure I was right. I'm not sure it mattered." It mattered. If I'd gone to town looking for a fight last week, Calvin could have played the victim. Now everyone knows what he is. They knew before. They just didn't care enough to do anything about it. Maybe, but now they've got a reason to care. You gave them that. He glanced at her. You were brave in there. I was terrified. That's what brave is, being terrified and doing it anyway. They were almost home when they saw the smoke. It rose in a thick black column from the direction of the ranch, visible miles away. Cole didn't say anything, just snapped the reins and urged the horses faster. The wagon bounced over ruts hard enough to rattle Evelyn's teeth, but she didn't complain. She just held on to the seat and watched that pillar of smoke grow larger. The barn was burning. Not just burning, engulfed. Flames poured from the windows and roof, and even from a distance Evelyn could hear the roar of it, could feel the heat. Dutch and the other ranch hands were running back and forth with buckets, but it was clearly hopeless. The barn was gone. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down before it fully halted. "Where are the horses?" "Got them out," Dutch shouted over the noise. "Cattle too, but the hay's gone, feed's gone, most of the tack." "Anyone hurt?" "No. It started fast, though, real fast, like someone used accelerant." Cole's expression went flat. He stood there watching his barn burn, hands clenched at his sides, and Evelyn could practically see the rage building behind his eyes. "He did this," Cole said quietly. "Calvin did this." "We don't know." "We know." He turned to Dutch. "You see anyone? Hear anything?" "Nothing. We were all in the south pasture, came back and found it like this." The barn's roof collapsed with a sound like thunder, sending sparks shooting into the darkening sky. Wyatt woke up crying, calling for his father. Cole went to him, pulling him close, murmuring reassurances that Evelyn could tell he didn't believe. She stood there watching everything burn, watching months of feed and equipment and irreplaceable tools turn to ash, and felt something inside her finally break. Not collapse. Break. Like a bone that had been stressed too long and finally gave way. This was her fault. Calvin had done this because of her, because she'd humiliated him in front of the town, stripped away his respectability, made him look small and powerless. And now Cole was paying the price. "I should leave," she said. Cole looked up sharply. "What?" "This is because of me. He's trying to hurt you to get to me. If you left, he'd burn down the house next." Cole's voice was hard. "You leaving wouldn't solve anything. It would just tell him that fear works, that he can do whatever he wants as long as he's willing to be cruel enough." "But your barn is gone. Already gone. Nothing we can do about it now except rebuild." He handed Wyatt to her. "Take him inside. Keep him away from the windows. I need to make sure this fire doesn't spread." Evelyn carried the boy into the house, his arms wrapped tight around her neck. Through the windows, she could see the barn burning like a funeral pyre, could see Cole and his men working desperately to keep the flames from jumping to the other buildings. They worked all night. Evelyn stayed inside with Wyatt, watching through the windows, making coffee and food that no one ate. By dawn, the barn was nothing but a skeleton of blackened timbers and ash. The men collapsed in the yard, too exhausted to even walk to the bunkhouse. Cole came inside as the sun was rising. His face was black with soot, his eyes red from smoke. He stood in the kitchen doorway looking lost, like he'd used up everything he had just getting through the night and had nothing left. "It's gone," he said unnecessarily. "I know. That was my father's barn. Built it himself 40 years ago. Survived blizzards and droughts and..." His voice broke. "And some spoiled bastard burned it down because I wouldn't let him play his games." Evelyn went to him, reached out carefully, placed her hand on his soot-stained sleeve. "We'll rebuild." "With what?" "I already spent most of my cash on feed that just went up in smoke. Insurance won't cover arson, and even if I had the money, winter's coming. Without that barn—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I might have to sell. Might have to take whatever Calvin offers and walk away from 40 years of my family's work." "No." "Evelyn, no, you're not letting him win. We'll figure something out." "We." Cole's laugh was bitter. "When did this become we? When you offered me a job that first day. When you stood up for me in town. When you—" She stopped, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how he was looking at her with something raw and desperate in his eyes. "When I what?" His voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "When you made me feel like I belonged somewhere." The space between them felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. Cole's hand came up slowly, hesitantly, and touched her face. His palm was rough and warm and trembling slightly. "I'm so tired," he said. "I'm so damn tired of losing things." "Then stop losing. Start fighting." "I don't know how to fight this." "Yes, you do. You've been fighting your whole life." Evelyn covered his hand with hers. "You just need to remember you're not fighting alone anymore." Something in his expression cracked open. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, and they stood there in the gray dawn light while the smell of smoke drifted through the windows and the ruins of the barn smoldered outside. "I don't know what I'm doing," Cole whispered. "Neither do I. But we'll figure it out together." Later, when the sun was fully up and the immediate crisis had passed, Evelyn walked out to look at what remained of the barn. The destruction was complete. 40 years of history reduced to ash and twisted metal in one night of calculated cruelty. She was standing there, staring at the ruins, when she heard a horse approaching. Her hand instinctively went to the knife she'd started carrying in her apron pocket, a kitchen knife, but sharp enough to do damage if needed. But it wasn't Calvin. It was Martha, riding a horse too big for her and looking uncomfortable about it. "Heard what happened," Martha said, dismounting carefully. "Whole town heard. News travels fast." "In Hollow Creek?" "News travels before it even happens." She walked over to stand beside Evelyn, looking at the charred remains. "Calvin's telling everyone it was an accident, faulty lantern or some such." "And people believe him?" "Some do. Some don't. Most are too scared to say what they really think." Martha was quiet for a moment. "But there are people who want to help. Good people who are tired of being afraid. They asked me to bring you this." She held out an envelope. Inside was money, not a fortune, but enough to buy lumber and supplies. There was also a note with a list of names. People willing to help rebuild. People willing to stand against Calvin Rourke. Evelyn felt tears burn her eyes. "Why?" "Because you stood up to him. Because you said out loud what we've all been thinking. And because sometimes people need to see someone else be brave before they can find their own courage." Martha squeezed her shoulder. "You're not alone in this. Remember that." After Martha left, Evelyn stood in the ruins of the barn and realized something had shifted. Calvin had burned down Cole's barn trying to break them, trying to drive her away, trying to prove he was still powerful and untouchable. But all he'd done was prove he was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. Evelyn folded the envelope carefully and walked back to the house, where Cole sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. She placed the money in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "A reminder that Calvin Rourke isn't as powerful as he thinks he is." Cole looked at the envelope, then at her, then at the list of names. Something changed in his expression, the defeat fading, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "We're going to need more than money to beat him," he said. "I know, but it's a start." Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. In the distance, wolves howled, and in the ashes of the barn, something small and stubborn refused to die. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. They started rebuilding 3 days after the fire. Not because they had a solid plan or enough money or any real certainty they could pull it off. They started because sitting still felt like surrender, and none of them were ready to surrender yet. The first morning, Cole walked out to the ruins before dawn and just stood there, coffee cup steaming in his hands, staring at the blackened timber skeleton like he was trying to will it back into existence through sheer force of anger. Evelyn found him there as the sky lightened, his shoulders hunched against the cold wind sweeping down from the mountains. "You going to stand there all day or actually do something?" she asked. He didn't turn around. "Trying to figure out where to start. Start by tearing down what's left. Can't build new on top of broken. That's some kind of philosophy? That's common sense." She came to stand beside him, her own breath fogging in the morning air. "You got tools for demolition?" "Got tools for everything. Had them stored in the barn." His laugh was bitter. "Most of them are probably melted scrap now. Then we borrow tools, or we improvise. But we start." Cole finally looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "You don't have to do this. This isn't your fight." "Yeah, it is. Calvin made it my fight when he decided I was something he could own." Evelyn wrapped her shawl tighter against the wind. "Besides, where else am I going to go? Back to Chicago where the factories are closed and the landlords are predators? Forward to some other town where I'm just another desperate woman with a carpetbag and bad luck? You could go east, start fresh somewhere Calvin's name doesn't mean anything. Or I could stay here and help you make sure his name stops meaning anything at all." They stood there in the ruins while the sun climbed higher, and finally Cole nodded. "All right then, let's get to work." Dutch and the other ranch hands showed up without being asked, bringing tools salvaged from the bunkhouse and borrowed from neighbors. Word had spread about Martha's collection, and throughout the morning people kept arriving, ranchers Cole barely knew, shopkeepers from town, even a few women who came with food baskets and offers to help however they could. Margaret Chen arrived with her husband and 3 sons, all of them carrying saws and hammers. "We owed Calvin money," she said when Cole tried to thank her. "He foreclosed on our first homestead 10 years back. This is payment of a different sort." By noon, they had a crew of nearly 20 people pulling down the destroyed structure, sorting through debris for anything salvageable. It was backbreaking work made worse by the smell, charred wood and burned hay and something else that made Evelyn's eyes water. But no one complained. They just worked, passing water and tools and occasionally grim jokes that helped lighten the weight of what they were doing. Wyatt appointed himself water boy, carrying a bucket and ladle between workers with the seriousness of someone given an important mission. He'd been quiet since the fire, prone to nightmares again, and clinging to Evelyn whenever she was nearby. But today, surrounded by all these people working together, some of the fear had left his face. "Miss Evelyn," he said during a water break, "are all these people our friends?" "I think they might be. Even though they didn't know us before? Sometimes the best friends are the ones you find when things are worst. They're the ones who show up not because they have to, but because they want to." Wyatt considered this, his small face serious. "Mr. Calvin doesn't have friends like this, does he?" "No, sweetheart. I don't think he does." "Good. I hope he's lonely." The viciousness in the boy's voice would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. 8 years old and already learning that some people deserved loneliness. They worked through the day, stopping only when the light failed and it became too dangerous to continue. That night, Evelyn cooked for everyone. Massive pots of stew and cornbread that disappeared faster than she could serve it. People ate standing up in the yard, too tired to care about proper manners, and the conversation was easy and warm in a way that made the ranch feel less isolated. Cole found Evelyn in the kitchen after everyone had left, scrubbing pots while Wyatt slept upstairs. "You didn't have to feed everyone." "Yes, I did. They're giving us their time. The least I can do is make sure they're fed." "Still, that was a lot of work." "Everything's a lot of work right now." She dried her hands on her apron, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Every muscle ached. Her hands were covered in small cuts from handling burned wood. "How long do you think this will take?" "Rebuilding. 6 weeks if we're lucky. More likely 2 months." Cole leaned against the doorframe. "That's assuming Calvin doesn't do something else to slow us down." "You think he will?" "I know he will. Burning the barn was just the opening move." As if summoning him by speaking his name, trouble arrived 2 days later in the form of the county sheriff. He rode up in the middle of the afternoon while they were framing out the new barn floor, his deputy trailing behind looking uncomfortable. Sheriff Morrison was a heavy man with a politician's smile and eyes that never quite met yours directly. He dismounted slowly, making a show of surveying the work site. "Cole Hale," he said, like they were old friends. "Heard about your barn. Terrible tragedy." "Wasn't a tragedy, Morrison. It was arson." "Now, we don't know that for certain." "I know it for certain. Everyone here knows it. Cole set down the hammer he'd been using. You come out here to actually investigate, or are you here to waste my time? Morrison's smile thinned. I'm here because there's been a complaint filed. Seems Calvin Rourke is accusing you of harassment and threats. Says you've been telling people he's responsible for this fire without any evidence. The evidence is the pile of ashes where my barn used to be. That's not evidence of anything except that you had a fire. Could have been an accident. Could have been what? Spontaneous combustion? Dutch stepped forward, anger written across his face. We know what we saw, Sheriff. We know what Calvin's capable of. What you think you know and what you can prove are two different things. Morrison pulled a paper from his coat. I've got a court order here. You're to cease all accusations against Calvin Rourke until a proper investigation has been conducted. That means no more spreading rumors in town. No more threatening behavior. I haven't threatened anyone. Calvin says otherwise, says you came at him in the town hall, that you've made it clear you intend him harm. Cole's jaw clenched so tight Evelyn could see the muscle jumping. Calvin's a liar. Maybe so, but he's a liar with influence and money, and right now he's claiming he's being victimized. Morrison looked past Cole to where Evelyn stood. This all started when that woman showed up, didn't it? Maybe if she moved along, things would settle down. Miss Mercer works for me. She's not going anywhere. That's your choice. But you might want to consider what her being here is costing you. Morrison climbed back on his horse. I'll be watching, Cole. Any more incidents, any more accusations without proof, and I'll have to take official action. Understood? Get off my land. Have a good day, gentlemen. Ma'am. Morrison tipped his hat to Evelyn with a smile that made her skin crawl, then rode off with his deputy in tow. The moment they were out of sight, Cole picked up a piece of scrap lumber and hurled it across the yard with enough force to embed it in the fence post. Spineless son of a bitch. He's scared of Calvin, Dutch said. Everyone's scared of Calvin. That's the problem. Cole turned to the assembled workers. Anyone who wants to leave, I understand. Calvin's making it clear he's going to come after anyone who helps me. I won't hold it against you if you decide this isn't worth the risk. No one moved. Margaret's husband spat tobacco juice into the dirt. We didn't come here because it was safe. We came because it was right. Damn right, someone else muttered, and a general rumble of agreement went through the group. Cole looked like he wanted to say something, maybe something about gratitude or honor, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. Finally, he just nodded and picked up his hammer. Then let's get back to work. But that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Cole sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands while Evelyn cleaned up dinner. He's gonna win, Cole said quietly. No, he's not. He's got the sheriff in his pocket. He's got money. He's got time. Cole looked up and his face was haggard. All I've got is a burned-down barn and a bunch of neighbors who are going to suffer for helping me. You've got more than that. Yeah? What's that? You've got the truth. And you've got people who are tired of being afraid. Evelyn sat down across from him. Calvin's power is built on fear and money, but fear only works as long as people stay isolated. The moment they realize they're not alone, that power starts cracking. You sound pretty sure about that. I'm not sure about anything, but I know that 3 weeks ago, people in Hollow Creek wouldn't say Calvin's name without looking over their shoulders. Now they're saying it openly. They're sharing stories. They're standing together. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. That's not nothing. Cole's fingers closed around hers, rough and warm. When did you get so damn optimistic? I'm not optimistic. I'm stubborn. There's a difference. His mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. I'm starting to figure that out. They sat there in the lamplight, hands clasped across the table, and Evelyn felt something shift between them. Something that had been building for weeks, maybe since that first day on the station platform when Wyatt had grabbed her and Cole had offered her refuge. It wasn't love exactly, or maybe it was love, but the complicated kind that came tangled up with need and convenience and shared trauma. Whatever it was real. Cole seemed to realize the same thing. He stood up slowly, still holding her hand, and pulled her to her feet. They stood there inches apart, the space between them charged with possibility and danger. I shouldn't, he started. Probably not. Sarah's only been gone 6 months. I know. And you're temporary? Evelyn supplied. Convenient? The hired help? You're none of those things. His free hand came up to cup her face. That's the problem. You're none of those things, and I don't know what to do about it. You don't have to do anything about it. Don't I? His thumb traced along her cheekbone. Because every time I look at you, I feel guilty as hell for not feeling guilty enough about how much I want to keep looking. Evelyn's breath caught. Cole, tell me to stop. Tell me this is a terrible idea, and I'll stop. She should have told him to stop. Should have reminded him about propriety and grief and the fact that their lives were already complicated enough without adding this particular complication. But standing there with his hand on her face and his eyes searching hers like she was something precious and rare, she couldn't make the words come. So instead she kissed him. It wasn't graceful or romantic. It was desperate and messy and tasted like coffee and uncertainty. Cole's arms came around her almost violently, pulling her close like he was trying to anchor himself to something solid. Evelyn gripped his shirt, feeling the heat of him through the fabric, feeling her own heart hammering against her ribs. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Cole rested his forehead against hers, his hands still locked around her waist. This is a terrible idea, he said. Probably the worst. People are going to talk. They're already talking. It's going to make everything harder. Everything's already hard. Evelyn pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. But if we're going to fight Calvin, if we're going to rebuild this ranch and protect your son and survive whatever's coming next, I'd rather do it while actually admitting we give a damn about each other. Cole's laugh was shaky. That what we're doing? Giving a damn about each other? That's the polite way of putting it. He kissed her again, slower this time, like he was memorizing the shape of it. When he pulled back, his expression was serious. I can't give you what Calvin promised. The stability, the security, the easy life. I don't want the easy life. I want the real one. The real one involves a burned barn, an insane enemy, and a traumatized 8-year-old who still cries for his dead mother at night. I know, I'm here anyway. Something in Cole's face cracked open, and for a moment he looked young and lost and grateful all at once. I don't deserve you. You're right, you don't. But you're stuck with me anyway. They stood there holding each other in the kitchen while the lamp burned low and the house settled around them. Upstairs, Wyatt called out in his sleep. Not a nightmare exactly, just the sound of a child checking to make sure he wasn't alone. Evelyn started to pull away, but Cole caught her hand. I'll go, he said. You've been up with him the last 3 nights. Are you sure? I'm his father. I should be the one checking on him. But there was something uncertain in Cole's voice, something that suggested he didn't quite trust himself to know what Wyatt needed anymore. Go together, Evelyn said. Show him we're both here. They climbed the stairs side by side and found Wyatt sitting up in bed, clutching the quilt Sarah had made him before she died. His eyes were wide and frightened in the lamplight. I heard voices, he said. I thought maybe someone was breaking in. Just us, buddy. Cole sat on the edge of the bed. Everything's all right. Are you sure? Because the barn broke and Mama went away and I don't want anything else to break. The simple devastation in those words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She knelt beside the bed, smoothing Wyatt's hair back from his forehead. Things are going to keep breaking sometimes, she said gently. That's just how life works. But the important thing is that people don't break. And even when they do, they can heal. You're healing. Your daddy's healing. We're all healing together. How do you know? Because 3 weeks ago, you were having nightmares every single night. Now it's only every few nights. Because last week you smiled at one of Dutch's terrible jokes. Because this morning I caught you singing while you were carrying water. She touched his cheek gently. You're getting better, sweetheart. It's slow and it's hard, and sometimes you slip backward. But you're getting better. Wyatt's eyes filled with tears. I miss her so much. I know you do. Cole's voice was rough. I miss her too. But Miss Evelyn makes it hurt less. Is that bad? No, son. That's not bad. That's how healing works. You don't forget the person you lost. You just learn to carry the missing them alongside the other things in your life. Cole glanced at Evelyn. Miss Evelyn's good at helping with that. Is she going to stay forever? The question hung in the air. Cole and Evelyn looked at each other over Wyatt's bed, and Evelyn saw her own uncertainty reflected in Cole's eyes. They hadn't talked about forever, hadn't talked about anything beyond getting through the next day and the day after that. I'm going to stay as long as you need me, Evelyn said finally. That's the best promise I can make right now. It seemed to be enough. Wyatt nodded and lay back down, still clutching his quilt. Will you stay until I fall asleep? Both of us will. They sat there on either side of his bed, Evelyn holding one of his hands and Cole holding the other, until his breathing evened out and sleep finally took him. Even then, they stayed a little longer, reluctant to break the fragile peace. He's going to be okay, Evelyn whispered. How do you know? Because he's got you, and now he's got me. And that's enough to build on. Cole's hand found hers across Wyatt's sleeping form. I meant what I said earlier, about not deserving you. And I meant what I said about being stuck with me anyway. They sat there in the darkness, holding hands across a sleeping child, and for the first time since the barn burned, the future felt like something other than an approaching disaster. But Calvin wasn't done yet. The next attack came at dawn, 3 days later. Evelyn was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard shouting from outside. She ran to the window and saw smoke rising from the new barn foundation. Not the massive conflagration that had destroyed the old barn, but something smaller and more targeted. Someone had dumped kerosene on the lumber they'd stacked and set it ablaze. Cole and Dutch were already there with buckets, dousing the flames before they could spread. They got it under control quickly, but the damage was done. $300 worth of lumber reduced to charcoal and ash. And nailed to what was left of the fence post, a note written in neat, precise handwriting. Leave while you still can. Cole pulled the note down, crumpling it in his fist. His face was dark with rage. That's it. I'm riding to town. Cole, don't. I'm done playing defense, Evelyn. I'm done sitting here waiting for Calvin to make the next move. So what are you going to do? Beat him up? Kill him? Because that's exactly what he wants. He wants you to do something violent and stupid so he can have you arrested. Then what am I supposed to do? Just let him keep burning my property? Keep threatening you? Keep terrorizing my son? No, you're supposed to be smarter than him. Evelyn grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. He's desperate, Cole. Can't you see that? He's escalating because the town council meeting didn't go the way he planned, because people are standing up to him. Desperate men make mistakes, and we need to let him make those mistakes instead of giving him exactly what he wants. And what does he want? He wants you out of control. He wants you to attack him so he can play the victim. He wants me gone so he can prove he still has power over something. Evelyn's voice was shaking now. Don't give him any of that. Don't give him anything. Cole stood there breathing hard, the crumpled note still clenched in his fist. Finally, he threw it on the ground. Fine, but we can't just sit here and take it. No, we can't. So we do what we've been doing. We rebuild. We document every attack. We gather evidence, and we make sure everyone in Hollow Creek knows exactly what Calvin Rourke is. That hasn't stopped him so far. Because he doesn't care what people think, but he does care about power, and every day that goes by where we don't break, where we don't run, is another day that power slips away from him. Dutch cleared his throat. She's right, boss. Calvin's used to people folding the moment he pushes. You fold, he wins everything. You stay standing, he's got to keep pushing harder. Eventually, he'll push so hard he falls over. And how many more attacks do we take before that happens? As many as it takes, Evelyn said. That afternoon, Margaret Chen arrived with her sons and news. Calvin's in town bragging about how you're going to sell the ranch to him. Says you can't afford to keep rebuilding, and he's prepared to make a generous offer. He can take his generous offer and... I know, Margaret interrupted. But other people don't. Other people are starting to believe him. Starting to think maybe it would be better if you just sold and moved on. Those people can go to hell. They're not bad people, Cole. They're just scared. They're thinking that if you sell, maybe Calvin will calm down. Maybe the violence will stop. The violence won't stop until someone stops Calvin. Then maybe it's time someone did. Margaret's expression was serious. There are people willing to help. People who've been hurt by Calvin over the years. If we organized, if we presented a united front, you'd just be putting targets on your backs. We already have targets on our backs. We've just been pretending we don't. She pulled out a list. These are names, 43 people who've agreed to sign a petition demanding the county investigate Calvin's business practices. It's not much, but it's a start. Cole looked at the list, then at Margaret, then at Evelyn. This could backfire. Calvin could go after every person on this list. Let him try. He can't fight all of us at once. They spent the next week gathering testimony. People came forward one by one, sharing stories of intimidation and fraud and violence. An old rancher showed the forged deed Calvin had used to claim his water rights. A widow brought papers proving Calvin had charged her 3 times the agreed interest rate. A former employee described watching Calvin beat a man who'd refused to sell his land. Evelyn wrote it all down, her hand cramping from hours of documentation. She organized the stories, cross-referenced dates, built a case that was damning in its comprehensiveness. "This is enough," she said one night, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "This is enough to destroy him." "Maybe," Cole said, "if we can get anyone with authority to actually look at it. Then we make them look. We take this to the territorial governor if we have to." But before they could do anything with their evidence, Calvin made his final move. It happened on a Tuesday night. Evelyn was upstairs putting Wyatt to bed when she heard riders approaching, many riders, moving fast. She ran to the window and saw at least a dozen mounted men, their faces obscured by bandanas, carrying torches and rifles. "Cole!" she screamed. He was already moving, grabbing his rifle from where it hung above the fireplace. "Get Wyatt and hide in the root cellar. Now!" "I'm not now, Evelyn." She ran for Wyatt's room, grabbed the sleepy, confused boy, and half-carried him down the stairs. Cole was shouting orders to Dutch and the others, and she could hear the ranch hands scrambling to defensive positions. The first shot shattered the front window. Evelyn screamed and threw herself over Wyatt, glass raining down on them both. More gunfire erupted, the sharp crack of rifles and the deeper boom of shotguns. Men were yelling, horses were screaming. The whole world had become chaos and noise and fear. "Root cellar!" Cole shouted again. "Go!" Evelyn dragged Wyatt toward the back of the house, staying low, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. They made it to the cellar door and she shoved the boy inside, then turned back. Cole was at the window, returning fire. Blood streaked down his face from a cut above his eye. Dutch was reloading frantically. Outside, she could see the barn, the new barn they'd worked so hard to build, beginning to burn. "No," Evelyn whispered. And then she saw him. Calvin Rourke sitting on his horse at the edge of the firelight, watching the destruction with a smile on his face. Something inside Evelyn snapped. She grabbed the shotgun from where it hung by the back door, checked that it was loaded, and ran outside before anyone could stop her. The heat from the burning barn hit her like a wall. Smoke stung her eyes, but she pushed through it, circling wide, using the chaos as cover. Calvin's men were focused on the house, on the men shooting back at them. None of them saw her coming. She got within 20 feet before Calvin noticed her. His smile faltered when he saw the shotgun pointed at his chest. "Tell them to stop," Evelyn said. Her voice was remarkably steady despite the terror racing through her veins. "Or what?" "You'll shoot me." Calvin's smile returned. "I don't think you have it in you, Miss Mercer." "Try me." For a long moment they stared at each other. The battle raged on behind them, gunfire and shouting and the roar of flames. Calvin's hand moved slowly toward the pistol at his hip. "Don't," Evelyn said. He drew anyway. The shotgun blast was deafening. Calvin's horse reared, screaming, and Calvin fell, hitting the ground hard, clutching his shoulder where buckshot had torn through muscle and bone. His men saw him fall. The shooting stopped like someone had flipped a switch. Everyone froze, staring at the scene before them. Calvin Rourke on the ground, bleeding, and a woman standing over him with a smoking shotgun. "The next person who fires a weapon dies," Evelyn said loudly. "Understood?" Calvin's men looked at each other. Then, one by one, they dropped their rifles and raised their hands. Cole ran up beside Evelyn, his own rifle still raised. "Jesus Christ, woman." "He drew on me first," Evelyn said. She was shaking now, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow. "Everyone saw it." "I saw it," Dutch confirmed, emerging from the house. "He drew first. She fired in self-defense." Calvin was groaning on the ground, blood seeping between his fingers. "You shot me. You crazy bitch. You shot me." "Yes, I did." Evelyn lowered the shotgun. "And I'll do it again if you come near this ranch, near this family, near me ever again." The sound of more horses approaching made everyone tense. But it was Sheriff Morrison, finally arriving with a proper posse. He took in the scene, the burning barn, the armed men, Calvin bleeding on the ground, and his face went pale. What in hell happened here? Attempted murder, Cole said. Calvin Rourke and his men attacked my ranch. Tried to burn us out. Miss Mercer acted in self-defense when he drew a weapon on her. That's... Morrison looked around at the dozen witnesses, all nodding in confirmation. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. And we've got plenty more truths to tell about Calvin Rourke. Cole pulled out the folder of evidence they'd compiled. Fraud, intimidation, assault, theft. It's all documented. 43 people willing to testify. Morrison looked at the folder like it was a snake. Then he looked at Calvin, still bleeding on the ground. Then at the assembled crowd of ranch hands and neighbors who'd heard the shooting and come running. Finally he sighed, "Somebody get the doctor, and somebody else get chains. Calvin Rourke, you're under arrest." The words seemed to echo across the valley. Calvin's men scattered, not wanting to be associated with him anymore. And Calvin himself, face pale with shock and pain, could only stare as the sheriff's deputies hauled him to his feet. "This isn't over," he hissed at Evelyn. "You think this is over?" "Yeah," Evelyn said quietly. "I think it is." They took him away in chains. The barn burned itself out. And as dawn broke over the Montana mountains, Evelyn stood in the yard surrounded by people who'd fought beside her, defended her, believed in her. Cole's arm was around her shoulders. Wyatt pressed against her side. And for the first time since stepping off that train months ago, she felt something that might have been hope. The fight was over. Now came the part where they figured out how to actually live. The days after Calvin's arrest moved in a strange rhythm, too fast and too slow at the same time. Evelyn would catch herself staring at nothing, her hands still shaking hours after the shooting, her mind replaying the moment she'd pulled that trigger over and over until the memory felt more real than the present. She'd shot a man. Not killed him, thank whatever forces governed the universe, but shot him nonetheless. The buckshot had torn through his shoulder, shattering bone and severing muscle. The doctor said he'd never have full use of that arm again. Part of Evelyn felt sick about that. Another part, a darker, angrier part she didn't quite recognize, felt satisfied. "You did what you had to do," Cole told her the morning after, finding her on the porch staring at the ruins of the second barn. "He would have killed you, killed all of us." "I know." "Then why do you look like you're about to fall apart?" "Because knowing something and feeling it are different things." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the sun climbing over the mountains. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd hesitated, if I'd second-guessed myself for even a moment. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." She turned to look at him, this man who'd offered her refuge when no one else would, who'd stood beside her through everything. "Is that what scares you? That I didn't hesitate?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. "What scares me is that you had to make that choice at all, that I brought you into this mess and almost got you killed. You didn't bring me into anything. Calvin did. And I made my own choices about staying. Still nothing." Evelyn's voice was firmer now. "I'm tired of people acting like I'm some helpless thing that got swept up in circumstances beyond my control. I chose to stay. I chose to fight. And I chose to pull that trigger when Calvin drew on me. Those were my choices, and I'm not going to apologize for them." Something shifted in Cole's expression, surprise mixed with what might have been respect. "You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just stop treating me like I'm fragile." "Fair enough." He moved closer, his hand finding hers. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're not fragile. Fragile women don't survive out here. Fragile women don't survive anywhere. They just get better at hiding the steel." The trial happened faster than anyone expected. With 43 witnesses willing to testify and documentation of Calvin's crimes stretching back years, the territorial judge saw no reason to delay. Calvin tried to buy his way out, hired the most expensive lawyer in 3 territories, called in favors from every politician who owed him money. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the public sentiment had turned completely against him. Evelyn testified on a Thursday morning. She wore her blue dress and pinned her hair up and tried to look like someone respectable instead of someone who'd shot a man 3 weeks earlier. The courtroom was packed. Seemed like half of Hollow Creek had shown up to watch Calvin Rourke's downfall. The prosecutor was a thin man with spectacles and a voice like gravel. "Miss Mercer, can you describe the events of the night in question?" Evelyn took a breath. Mr. Rourke and approximately 12 armed men attacked the Hale ranch. They set fire to the barn and opened fire on the house. When I saw Mr. Rourke sitting on his horse directing the attack, I retrieved a shotgun and confronted him. And then what happened? I told him to call off his men. He reached for his pistol. I fired in self-defense. Did Mr. Rourke say anything to you before drawing his weapon? He asked if I would really shoot him, said he didn't think I had it in me. And what did you say? I told him to try me. A ripple of something, amusement maybe, or satisfaction, went through the courtroom. Calvin's lawyer objected, claimed Evelyn was being inflammatory, but the judge overruled him. Miss Mercer, the lawyer said when it was his turn to cross-examine, isn't it true that you came to Montana specifically to marry my client? I came to Montana believing I was going to marry him, yes. And when that arrangement fell through, you immediately moved into Cole Hale's home, a man whom my client describes as a rival, an enemy. Mr. Hale offered me employment. I accepted because I had no other options. Or because you and Mr. Hale had conspired together to defraud my client. Objection! The prosecutor was on his feet. Counsel is testifying rather than questioning. Sustained. Get to a question, counselor. Calvin's lawyer adjusted his spectacles. Miss Mercer, how much is Cole Hale paying you for your services? The way he said services made it sound obscene. Evelyn felt her face heat, but kept her voice level. $20 a month plus room and board. And has your relationship with Mr. Hale remained strictly professional? That's none of your business. It's very much my business if you and Mr. Hale conspired to humiliate and defraud my client. I didn't conspire with anyone. Your client abandoned me at a train station, spread lies about me throughout Hollow Creek, destroyed Mr. Hale's property, and then attacked us with armed men in the middle of the night. Those are facts. My relationship with Cole Hale has nothing to do with your client's crimes. The lawyer tried several more angles, but Evelyn held her ground. When she finally stepped down, she caught Cole's eye in the audience. He nodded once, a small gesture that somehow steadied her shaking legs. The verdict came down 3 days later. Guilty on all counts: arson, assault, attempted murder, fraud, intimidation. The judge sentenced Calvin to 15 years in the territorial prison, and the courtroom erupted in applause. Evelyn didn't applaud. She just sat there feeling hollow and tired and strangely unsatisfied. Justice had been served, supposedly. Calvin would spend the next decade and a half behind bars. His business empire was being dismantled, his properties seized to pay restitution to his victims. But Sarah Hale was still dead. 2 barns were still destroyed. Wyatt still woke up crying in the night. And Evelyn still saw Calvin's face every time she closed her eyes, saw him reaching for that pistol, saw the blood blooming across his shoulder. Justice didn't erase the damage. It just drew a line under it and said this chapter is closed. The rebuilding started again the week after the trial. This time, nearly the entire town showed up to help. What Calvin had meant to destroy through violence and intimidation had instead galvanized the community into something stronger. People who'd been too afraid to stand against him before now showed up with tools and supplies and a determination to prove that fear hadn't won. The new barn went up in 6 weeks. It was bigger than the old one, built with better materials and more care. On the day they raised the roof beam, someone produced a fiddle and someone else brought whiskey, and suddenly there was a party happening in the Hale Ranch yard. People danced and sang and celebrated not just the barn, but the fact that they'd survived, that they'd fought back and won. Evelyn stood on the porch watching it all, feeling both part of it and separate from it. These were good people having a good time, but she couldn't quite shake the weight that had settled over her since the shooting. "You're doing it again," Martha said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of punch. "That thing where you disappear inside your own head." Just thinking. About how strange it is. 3 months ago I was nobody. Just another desperate woman stepping off a train with 1 bag and no prospects. Now I'm the woman who shot Calvin Rourke, the woman who helped bring him down. People look at me differently. Does that bother you? I don't know. Maybe. Evelyn took a sip of punch. It was too sweet, and someone had definitely spiked it with something stronger. I didn't want to be famous for violence. I wanted to just exist quietly somewhere. Well, too bad. You're a legend now. Martha smiled. The abandoned bride who refused to stay abandoned. Women are going to be telling your story for years. That's what worries me. What if they tell it wrong? What if they make me into something I'm not? Some kind of hero who wasn't scared or didn't make mistakes? Then you tell your own version. Make sure people know the truth. What is the truth? Martha considered this. The truth is that you were terrified and desperate, and you fought anyway. The truth is that none of this was graceful or easy or certain. The truth is that you're still figuring out what happens next, just like everyone else. She squeezed Evelyn's shoulder. That's the story that matters. Not the legend. The messy, complicated truth. That night, after everyone had gone home and Wyatt was asleep and the house was finally quiet, Cole found Evelyn in the kitchen. She was making bread even though they didn't need bread. She just needed something to do with her hands. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Don't want to. Every time I close my eyes, I see—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Never mind. You see Calvin, the shooting, the blood." Evelyn's hands stilled in the dough. "How did you know?" "Because I saw the same things after the war. After Sarah died. After every bad thing that's happened." Cole pulled out a chair and sat down. "It gets easier. Not gone, but easier." "When?" "I'll let you know when it happens." His smile was tired. "Come sit down. The bread can wait." Evelyn washed her hands and joined him at the table. They sat in companionable silence for a while, just listening to the house settle and the wind move through the eaves. "I've been thinking," Cole said finally, "about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you came here temporarily. That was the agreement. Room and board and $20 a month until you figured out what you were doing next." He was staring at his hands, not meeting her eyes. "I'm releasing you from that agreement. You're free to go wherever you want. I'll give you enough money to get anywhere in the country, help you find a new situation." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to have a choice. A real choice. Not one forced by circumstances or desperation." Now he did look at her, and his eyes were serious. "You've done more for us than I ever had a right to ask. You've helped Wyatt heal. You've helped save this ranch. You've stood up to Calvin when half the territory was too scared to say his name. But none of that means you owe us your life. And if I want to stay?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Then you need to understand what you're staying for. This ranch barely survived the last 3 months. We've got debts piling up, livestock we lost in the attacks, equipment we need to replace. It's going to be years before we're really stable again. And that's assuming we don't have another bad winter, or drought, or any of the 1,000 other disasters that can destroy a ranch." "I know all that. Do you? Because staying here means hard work and uncertainty and probably more struggle than anyone should have to deal with. It means being tied to a man with a traumatized kid and a dead wife's ghost hanging over everything. It means small-town gossip and people who'll always wonder about your motives. It means It means having a home," Evelyn interrupted. "It means having people who care whether I live or die. It means mattering to someone other than myself." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "I know what I'm choosing, Cole, and I'm choosing to stay." "Why?" "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving, I'm living. And I'm living with people who make me want to keep living." She squeezed his hand. "You and Wyatt, you're my family now, the family I chose, and I'm not walking away from that." Cole's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "I'm going to disappoint you, probably multiple times. I'm not good at talking about feelings or being the kind of man women write romantic stories about." "Good. I don't want a character from a story. I want you. Flawed and difficult and terrible at expressing emotions." Evelyn smiled. "I want the man who offered a stranger work when everyone else saw a problem. I want the father who's trying so hard to help his son heal even when he doesn't know how. I want the rancher who won't give up even when everything's burning down around him." "You make me sound better than I am." "I make you sound like what you are. Human, complicated, real." She stood up and moved around the table until she was standing in front of him. "I love you, Cole Hale. Not in spite of your flaws, but including them. And if you'll have me, I'd like to stay and build a life here. With you. With Wyatt. With all the mess and struggle and uncertainty that comes with it." Cole pulled her down into his lap, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid she might disappear if he didn't hold on tight enough. "I love you too. Have for weeks now, probably." Just been too scared and stupid to say it. Then say it now. I love you, Evelyn Mercer. I love your stubbornness and your strength and the way you don't take my bullshit. I love that you make my son smile. I love that you make me want to be better than I am. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Marry me. Not because you need security or because it's practical. Marry me because you want to, because we choose each other. Evelyn's breath caught. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Probably, but is it working? Yes, you idiot. Yes, I'll marry you. They kissed there in the kitchen with the bread dough forgotten on the counter and the lamp burning low and the whole uncertain future stretching out before them. And for the first time since stepping off that train, Evelyn felt like she'd finally arrived somewhere worth staying. They told Wyatt the next morning over breakfast. The boy looked back and forth between them, his expression cautious. So, Miss Evelyn's going to be my new mama? He asked. If that's all right with you, Evelyn said. I know I can't replace your first mama. No one can. But I'd like to be a different kind of mama. One who loves you and takes care of you and helps you remember all the good things about her. Wyatt thought about this seriously. Can I still talk about her? About Mama Sarah? Of course, anytime you want. And can I love both of you, or is that not allowed? Evelyn's throat tightened. You can absolutely love both of us. Your heart's big enough for that. Okay then, Wyatt nodded once, decisive. Then I think it's a good idea. Daddy smiles more when you're around, and you make really good pancakes. Cole laughed, a sound Evelyn realized she hadn't heard nearly enough of. Those are excellent reasons to get married. They set the wedding for 6 weeks out, which gave Evelyn just enough time to panic about every possible detail while simultaneously insisting she didn't care about details. Martha helped her sew a dress, nothing fancy, just a simple cream-colored thing that fit well and made her feel like herself. Cole bought a new suit that made him look uncomfortable and handsome in equal measure. Wyatt got new boots and tried to comb his hair flat, though it rebelled after about 10 minutes. The ceremony took place at the ranch on a Saturday afternoon in late September. The weather cooperated, sunny and warm with just enough breeze to keep it from being hot. People came from all over the county, filling the yard with conversation and laughter and the kind of energy that came from a community celebrating together. The preacher was a traveling minister who showed up once a month and seemed delighted to perform a wedding instead of a funeral for once. He kept the ceremony short and simple, which everyone appreciated. When he got to the part about objections, Dutch shouted, "Get on with it," from the back, and everyone laughed. Cole's vows were short and stumbling and absolutely perfect. I promise to do right by you, to stand beside you when things are hard and celebrate with you when they're good, to listen even when I don't want to hear it, to be the man you deserve, or die trying. Evelyn's vows were more composed but no less honest. I promise to be your partner, not your property, to challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right, to love your son like he's mine, to build a life with you that's worth fighting for, to choose you every day, even when it's not easy. Especially when it's not easy, Cole added, especially then. When the preacher pronounced them married, Cole kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The crowd erupted in cheers and wolf whistles, and Wyatt jumped up and down shouting, "Now she's really staying forever!" The reception lasted until well after dark. Someone had roasted a pig. Someone else brought enough beer and whiskey to stock a saloon. The fiddle player was joined by a guitar and a harmonica, and soon people were dancing in the yard under the stars. Margaret Chen cried happy tears and insisted on hugging everyone. Dutch got drunk and started arm wrestling anyone who'd take him on. Martha stood at the edge of it all, looking satisfied, like she'd personally orchestrated the whole thing. Evelyn danced with Cole, with Wyatt, with Dutch, and several of the other ranch hands, with her new neighbors and the shopkeepers from town, and even old Tom, who claimed his dancing days were behind him, but still managed a credible waltz. She danced until her feet hurt, and her face ached from smiling, and the world felt dizzy and golden and full of possibility. Late in the evening, she found herself standing near the new barn, with a cup of punch in hand, watching the celebration and trying to memorize every detail. This moment, she thought, this is what happiness feels like. Not perfect or uncomplicated or certain, just real and present and good enough. "You look happy," Martha said, appearing beside her like she'd been summoned by Evelyn's thoughts. "I am happy, also terrified, also exhausted, but mostly happy." That's how it should be. Anyone who tells you they're happy all the time is either lying or delusional. Martha raised her own cup in a toast. To messy, complicated happiness. To messy, complicated happiness, Evelyn echoed. They stood there watching people dance and laugh and celebrate. And Evelyn thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train 3 months ago. That woman had been desperate and scared and convinced her life was over. She'd been wrong about that. Her life hadn't been over. It had been waiting. Waiting for her to stop running, stop hiding, stop accepting whatever scraps the world decided to throw her way. Thank you, Evelyn said suddenly. For what? For being the first person in Hollow Creek who was kind to me. For not judging. For standing up when it mattered. Martha waved this away. I didn't do anything special. You did. You all did. You proved that people can be better than their fear, that a community is only as strong as its willingness to protect the vulnerable. Evelyn looked at her friend. That matters. That makes a difference. Well, don't get all sentimental on me. I've got a reputation as a hard woman to maintain. Your secret's safe with me. The party wound down eventually, people drifting away in groups and pairs until only the closest friends remained. Cole found Evelyn and pulled her close, swaying to music that had stopped playing. You tired? He asked. Completely exhausted. Want to go inside? Not yet. Let's stay out here a little longer. I want to remember this exactly as it is. So they stood there under the Montana stars, holding each other while their son ran around with the few remaining children and their friends cleaned up the remnants of celebration. The barn stood solid behind them, rebuilt from ashes. The house glowed with lamplight. Smoke rose from the fire pit where someone was burning the last of the trash. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was perfect. The ranch still had debts. Winter was coming with all its challenges. There would be hard days ahead. Everyone knew it, even if no one said it aloud. Sarah's absence would always be a hollow place in this family. Calvin's attack had left scars that wouldn't fade quickly. But they'd survived, more than survived. They'd fought back and won. They'd built something worth protecting. And standing there in her husband's arms with her son's laughter carrying across the yard, Evelyn finally understood what home meant. Not a place you were born to, not a situation you fell into out of desperation, but a space you carved out through choice and courage and the stubborn refusal to let fear make your decisions. Home was the people who stood beside you when everything was burning. Home was the child who called you mama, even though you weren't the one who gave birth to him. Home was the man who offered you work when you needed refuge and love when you were ready for it. Home was the community that showed up with tools and food and the willingness to rebuild. Home was choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. Months later, when the first snow fell and they were all huddled around the fireplace, Wyatt would ask Evelyn to tell him the story of how she came to Montana. And she would tell him the truth, not a fairy tale about destiny or fate or things meant to be, but the real story about a desperate woman, a broken family, and a town that learned to fight back against tyranny. She would tell him about the train platform where no one was waiting, about his father's kindness in offering a stranger work, about Calvin's cruelty and the community's fear and the slow, painful process of finding courage. She would tell him about the barn burning and the town hall meeting and the night she shot a man to protect their family. And she would tell him the most important part, that none of it had been easy or clean or certain, that she'd been scared every single day, that she'd made mistakes and gotten lucky and survived more through stubbornness than any innate heroism. But you stayed, Wyatt would say, snuggled against her side. Even when it was scary, you stayed. I stayed because I found something worth staying for, Evelyn would tell him. I found you. I found your father. I found a place where I could stop running and start living. And were you scared? Terrified. But you did it anyway? That's what bravery is, sweetheart. Being scared and doing it anyway. And Wyatt would nod like this was wisdom he needed to store away for later, when his own life presented him with impossible choices and frightening decisions. He would carry that lesson with him, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. But that conversation was still months away. Tonight, on this perfect, imperfect evening, Evelyn just held her new husband and watched the stars wheel overhead and let herself feel grateful. She'd stepped off a train believing her life was ending. She'd been wrong. Her life had been waiting to begin. And now, finally, it had. The woman who'd arrived in Hollow Creek with one carpetbag and no prospects was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd learned that survival wasn't about avoiding hardship, but about facing it head on. Someone who'd discovered that family wasn't just blood, but choice. Someone who'd proven that even the most desperate beginnings could lead to something worth fighting for. The abandoned bride had found her home, not through the promises of a man who'd never intended to keep them, but through her own courage, her own choices, her own stubborn refusal to accept that she was worthless. Calvin Rourke had tried to break her. Instead, she'd helped break his empire. And in the breaking and rebuilding, she'd found the one thing she'd been searching for all along, a place where she belonged. Not because she was needed or convenient or desperate, but because she was valued for exactly who she was. That was the real victory, not the trial or the justice or Calvin's imprisonment, though those mattered. The real victory was standing here, married to a good man, mother to a healing boy, part of a community that had learned to stand together. The real victory was choosing to stay when every instinct screamed at her to run. The real victory was love, messy and complicated and hard-won, but real. As the last guests finally departed and Cole lifted a sleeping Wyatt to carry him inside, Evelyn took one last look at the ranch that had become hers. The mountains stood eternal in the distance. The rebuilt barn stood solid and strong. The house glowed warm and welcoming. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be work to do, decisions to make, struggles to face. Life on a Montana ranch in the 1880s wasn't easy for anyone, and especially not for a woman who'd come from nothing and built everything from scratch. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she was home. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.